Chapter 1072. Guo Wentian's voice was very light and short. But Chen Fangqing, who had been maintaining an indifferent posture, suddenly shook his body. Li Tianlan entered the capital. Everyone knew that this would happen sooner or later. It was something that was bound to happen. But when he heard the news, Chen Fangqing couldn't help feeling upset. It was irritation, panic, fear, cold, and he didn't want to face it. At that moment, Chen Fangqing's emotions were so clear and so desperate. Guo Wentian watched all this in silence, and his eyes were a little gloomy. Now it was not only Chen Fangqing who had these emotions. As Li Tianlan entered the capital, the whole prince group was in a panic. It had been less than 24 hours since the final battle in Beihai. After Li Tianlan defeated all his opponents, he went straight to Yuzhou without hesitation. Yes, he went straight. Simple, straightforward, brutal, and domineering. For the people of the prince group, everyone could feel Li Tianlan's determination. It was a kind of indescribable cruelty, with naked fierceness and blood. With every inch he got closer to Yuzhou in the air, the prince group would feel more danger. For several years, the prince group, which had always been the protagonist, had done too many things that should and should not have been done. Perhaps, as Chen Fangqing said, what they did was right. But Emperor Dong's palace would not accept it. Many things in the world, in many cases, did not pay attention to simple right or wrong. Li Tianlan won the final battle in Beihai and controlled Chen Fangqing's life and death. He controlled Chen Fangqing's life and death, which was equivalent to controlling the future of the prince group. As soon as Li Tianlan arrived in Yuzhou, the whole prince group smelled an extremely strong bloody storm. Everyone was waiting for Li Tianlan's action in an almost suffocating depression. What are their demands? Chen Fangqing took several deep breaths in a row and asked hoarsely. They haven't mentioned the specific demands. Guo Wentian shook his head with a heavy look. After all, everything has just begun, but the establishment of the new group is a foregone conclusion. During this time, Wu Zhengmin and Bai Qingqian have made big moves. Chen Fangqing snorted and asked, Nanyue. We can't keep it. Hearing those words, Chen Fangqing helplessly replied, We've previously discussed that Nanyue province will definitely fall. The Haoyue group's matter is getting bigger, and it's extremely troublesome. It hasn't even been a day since the decisive battle in Beihai, and 3 of the Haoyue group's higher-ups have already surrendered themselves. If we want this matter to end quickly, we have to give up on Nanyue province. Otherwise, it won't be easy for us. Chen Fangqing gritted his teeth. Haoyue group was a super large group that he had single-handedly supported. It was also the most beneficial cash cow for the entire Chen family. Although there were not many similar groups in Zhongzhou state, there were still quite a few of them. In many cases, in order to fight for something that had to be fought for, consortiums like Haoyue group would act beyond the rules. More often, when they traded with certain foreign groups and forces, they carried the will of the country. However, this kind of thing couldn't be brought to the table, so it left countless hidden dangers. The reason why Haoyue group had fallen to this extent today was not that the chairman of Haoyue group was killed. The most fundamental reason was that Chen Fangqing's foundation was unstable, and he couldn't protect himself. As the prime minister of a country, he was undoubtedly the most representative of Zhongzhou state. He could easily cover up many things of Haoyue group. Although he did something wrong this time, no one could deny his character and position. Haoyue group had indeed delivered a lot of benefits to different foreign forces over the years, including money, technical information, technical drawings, and even weapons. But what Haoyue group exchanged from them and served Zhongzhou state could only be more. But with Chen Fangqing's unstable status, there was no way to say these things. Everyone would deliberately cover up what Haoyue group had brought to Zhongzhou state. People would only pay attention to what Haoyue group had taken away from Zhongzhou state. Right and wrong were never pure. In the current situation, even the prince group would not speak for Chen Fangqing and support him for self-preservation. Giving up Nanyue province and letting the Haoyue group's matter come to an end was something that had been discussed a week ago in Zhongzhou state. The first to propose this was Wu Zhengmin, the deputy prime minister of Zhongzhou state. This was undoubtedly the condition of the new group, and right now, the prince group had no room to bargain, no matter how unwilling they were. They had to give up. Although Haoyue Group had not been in trouble for a long time, so far, 2 directors of Nanyue Group had been deeply involved in the quagmire. If they didn't let go, no one knew how much trouble they would make in the end. No one would doubt the determination of Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan. The establishment of a new group was not something that could be done verbally, nor could it be done by sending Wu Zhengmin to the position of a director of Zhongzhou State. The most basic structure of a group was the need of territory. A territory to improve its own structure, cultivate new blood, make a unified voice, and implement its own ideas. Every group had such a territory. For example, the Southeast Group's Beihai Province and the former Wuyue Province. For example, the Prince Group's Tianfu Province and Southwest City. For example, the Giant Group's Zhongyuan Province. For example, the North Group's North City and the Northwest and Northeast regions with great influence of the academics. Li Tianlan's new group also needed territory, which was enough to support the continuous expansion of a new large group and constantly condense its own territory. At present, Nanyue was the most suitable area. It was the forefront of the development of Zhongzhou State. In terms of economic output, it was second only to Wuyue. It was one of the most developed provinces in Zhongzhou State and had a perfect structure. The speaker of Nanyue was all members of Zhongzhou State. This was also crucial for the new group. With Nanyue, the new group had a stable foundation. Not to mention the future, at least there was no risk of falling apart directly. The Prince Group's influence in Nanyue Province was great. Although it couldn't be compared to Tianfu's backyard, the Prince Group's influence in Nanyue Province has always held an absolute advantage in the game. The current chairman of Nanyue Province was one of the leaders of the Prince Group. Out of the 13 directors, 7 of them came from the Prince Group, including a vice chairman. Among the remaining 6 directors, 2 were from the Southeast Group, 1 from the Giant Group, 2 from the academics, and the last one was a local senior official without obvious traces of a group. At the city level, the Prince Group's advantage was also obvious. Now with the rise of the new group, most of these people had to be transferred. All of them had to be transferred. Perhaps the others might be able to get a good position, but the Prince Group has been shrinking. So it's already good enough for them to be transferred out of Nanyue Province, not to mention getting a better position. Such a heavy loss, even Chen Fangqing, who was worried about the future of himself and his family, couldn't bear to see it. More importantly, that wasn't all. This was just the condition that the new group used to settle the case of Haoyue Group. The new group would not stop after cutting Nanyue. They would continue to cut meat from the Prince Group to expand their sphere of influence. Nanyue was changed after the Haoyue Group, which showed how big the appetite of Li Tianlan and the new group was. In addition to Nanyue, at present, the most likely place for them to use as conditions is Xie. I got the news that Wang Shengxiao went to Tiannan and had a fight with Li Tianlan a few hours after the end of the final battle in Beihai. Wang Shengxiao was defeated and must pay the price. According to my speculation, the new group will also take Jiangnan and Dongshan. As a new group, it's enough to own the 4 provinces of Nanyue, Xie, Jiangnan, and Dongshan. Chen Fangqing's facial muscles twitched again, but he didn't know whether he should be glad or angry. Xie was also one of the back gardens of the Prince Group, and Dongshan was the area where the Southeast Group and the Prince Group checked and balanced each other. It was also a place where every inch of land was contested. The only exception was Jiangnan Province, which was one of the back gardens of the Southeast Group. Nanyue, Xie, Dongshan, Jiangnan. Chen Fangqing silently thought about these 4 provinces. His face became more and more ugly, and he wanted to say something several times but stopped. In the end he said, "No, we can't give it to him." "What can I do?" Guo Wentian spread his palms and said, "The opponent's thinking is so accurate that we can't stop him at all." Among the 4 provinces, Nanyue Province and Dongshan Province were the most developed. Nanyue Province was something that the Crown Prince Group had no choice but to give. As for Xie Province, a province might be important to any corporation, but there's a hierarchy in everything. Under the current situation, it's not that the Crown Prince Group couldn't afford Xie Province. In the eyes of the Crown Prince Group, Xie Province was a province that they could give up if necessary. Similarly, Jiangnan was the same for the Southeast Group. When they had to compromise, Jiangnan would also be given up by the Southeast Group. A province that could be given up meant that Emperor Dong's palace would not spend much effort to get it. The two entry points that the opponent found, Xie and Jiangnan, could be said to be extremely accurate. After this, the Prince Group would definitely not be able to keep Dongshan. The new group wanted Dongshan, but it was not its back garden. The Southeast Group would not fight with the new group for those positions. The rise of Emperor Dong's palace had become inevitable. Under such circumstances, an appropriate compromise was acceptable to everyone. This also meant that Emperor Dong's palace didn't need to spend too much effort to get 4 provinces to form the basic framework of the new group. With Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace's current power, they could take away more provinces, not to mention 4. But now they only wanted 4 provinces, and they could get them without much effort. What did this mean? The only possibility was that they wanted to divert more attention elsewhere. Where else could it be? Chen Fangqing thought of Wu Zhengmin and Bai Qingqian. His expression became more and more unsightly, and under the illumination of the light, it was suffused with a touch of black and green. Unless there was a huge accident, after the decisive battle in Beihai, part of the seats of the next Zhongzhou State Parliament had already been settled. Wu Zhengmin, the current Deputy Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, would become a director of Zhongzhou State and further serve as the Deputy Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, becoming the real second-in-command of the cabinet. Bai Qingqian, on the other hand, would give up Liaodong, which she had been managing for 5 years, and let that land return to the control of the academics. Then she would take over Wu Zhengmin's current position and become one of the Deputy Prime Ministers of Zhongzhou State. The two of them, along with Nanyue Province's new chairman, would be the 3 heads of the new conglomerate. 2 of them are in the cabinet. A vice minister and a vice minister were in the cabinet. The cabinet that dominated the development of the country and the economy of the country. There was no doubt that in order to support their new 3 heads, the new conglomerate would devote all its energy to competing for the leadership of the ministries in the cabinet after they took over 4 provinces. Once they got enough say in this regard, they could give back to the 4 provinces they controlled in terms of national policies to form a cycle, and then make the new conglomerate permanently stable. Once this goal was achieved, there would be a private voice similar to the Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State. Chen Fangqing had thought countless times about erasing the influence of the Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State. As a result, the Wang family of Beihai was still there, and Emperor Dong's palace would become the second Wang family of Beihai. How could he stand this? Chen Fangqing's face turned from livid to blood red. He suddenly stood up, but for a moment, he felt confused and dizzy. Then he fell on the sofa again. Thief! Chen Fangqing's extremely depressed voice sounded like an extremely shrill low roar. Thief! Wang Tianzong is a thief, and so is Li Tianlan. They are all thieves. They all deserve to die. Bang! The teacup on the coffee table was suddenly hit away by Chen Fangqing's hand. The cup fell and rolled on the ground. It didn't break, but the warm tea splashed everywhere, and some splashed on Guo Wentian's pants. Guo Wentian silently looked at Chen Fangqing, who was crazily venting his emotions. He silently smoked and did not say a word. Chen Fangqing knocked over the teacup, kicked over the coffee table, and even lifted the carpet. His body fell on the sofa again, panting violently and pressing his forehead hard. The severe pain made his consciousness a little dizzy. He tried to breathe and kept muttering to himself. Stop him, I must stop him. He rubbed his forehead, looked at Guo Wentian seriously again, and said in a deep voice, Stop him. If it goes on like this, it will be bad for the country. I can die, and I can lose my reputation. I don't care about these. Li Tianlan wants the new conglomerate to rise, and I can support it. But their plan must be stopped. We can't stop him. Guo Wentian shook his head without hesitation. Pull one hair and the whole body will be affected. Stop how? Chen Fangqing was stunned for a while, and then said slowly, Just stop one of Bai Qingqian and Wu Zhengmin. Or the cabinet ministries and commissions, stop some candidates of the new conglomerate. Even if they are given another province, they must stop them. They can't stop them. Guo Wentian shook his head. They may not be willing to take another province even if they are given another one. Now the opposite side's goal is very simple, that is, to have the right to speak in the cabinet. If necessary, they can even abandon Jiangnam province and continue to cooperate with the Southeast Group. How can things be so simple? That's why I'm here today. The opposite side has begun to make arrangements. If the arrangements are successful, their new conglomerate will mature quickly in the next session. At that time, for provinces may not be enough. In the next session, Zhou Yunhai should also retire, and Northern City is likely to fall into Li Tianlan's hands. He doesn't even have to fight for this. So after stabilizing the internal situation in the next session, they are very likely to want to fight for Huading, and even Wuyue. At that time, Wang Qinglei can't be protected. In the long run, the situation will only get worse and worse. I hope you can give me a reasonable suggestion. Guo Wentian looked at Chen Fangqing seriously and said. Chen Fangqing had been in the cabinet for more than 10 years. Now the cabinet had become the focus of this election, and the Prince Group was in danger. Guo Wentian hoped to get some effective suggestions from Chen Fangqing. Chen Fangqing was silent and lit another cigarette. He rubbed his forehead hard. When the cigarette was about to burn out, he said in a low voice, "Cooperate with the academics and let Zhuang Huayang take over. Wang Qinglei will be transferred to the cabinet, and his ranking should be ahead of Bai Qingqian." Guo Wentian frowned and was a little unhappy. His voice also became cold. "In this case, I'm afraid the comrades' work will be difficult." Chen Fangqing surprisingly calmed down. He looked at Guo Wentian with clear eyes and said, "This is the only way." Guo Wentian was stunned. This only way would also make many people in the Prince Group dissatisfied. Cooperate with the academics? They had just finished cooperating with the academics. In a sense, at the most critical time of the cooperation between the two sides, if Li Huaqing hadn't taken the academics to withdraw first, the current Prince Group and Chen Fangqing might not have ended up like this. As long as the two sides united, Li Tianlan and Wang Shengshao could not make too much trouble. But at the most critical moment, Li Huaqing withdrew. This was undoubtedly a betrayal, a blatant betrayal. The senior officials of the Prince Group were naturally unwilling to cooperate with the academics. Perhaps they were not so immature and could look at the problem rationally, but people's emotions were always difficult to control. And the most important thing was Wang Qinglei. After the final battle in Beihai, the competition between Wang Qinglei and Yi Dongxing basically came to an end. The possibility of Wang Qinglei going further in this election was basically zero. He would still be a member of parliament of Zhongzhou State in the next election. But Chen Fangqing actually wanted him to go to the cabinet. This was tantamount to asking Wang Qinglei to give up Wuyue, and the base he had run for many years. If Wang Qinglei could not go further, then from Speaker of Wuyue to the Deputy Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State was equal to a transfer. Wang Qinglei could now be regarded as a member of the Prince Group, but Wuyue was still the territory of the Southeast Group. The Southeast Group still had a strong influence in Wuyue. Once Wang Qinglei left, it would be difficult for the Prince Group, or even extremely difficult for them to push their own people to the position of Speaker of Wuyue. Moreover, Wang Qinglei was transferred out to cooperate with the academics and make the current Deputy Prime Minister Zhuang Huayang the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State. To achieve this goal, the cooperation between the two sides was not enough. The academics must also appease the Southeast Group. So once they did this, the Southeast Group almost immediately took back Wuyue. This was the most difficult thing for the Prince Group to accept. They had lost Wuyue this time, and they were counting on Wang Qinglei to work in Wuyue for another term and complete the integration. Then they would take Wuyue as a compensation for giving up Nanyue. But now they transferred Wang Qinglei away to check and balance Wu Zhengmin and Bai Qingqian, and let Wang Qinglei be Zhuang Huayang's subordinate? Guo Wentian silently looked at Chen Fangqing, who was in deep thought, with some dissatisfaction, some anger, and some admiration. Chen Fangqing's method was tantamount to completely giving up Wuyue, and even giving up Wang Qinglei's future. Guo Wentian actually wanted to ask Chen Fangqing if he had the Prince Group in his heart. But he already knew the answer before he asked this question. No. At this time, Chen Fangqing did not have the Prince Group, his family, or even himself in his heart. There was only Zhongzhou State in his heart. He really thought that it was not good for the country to let Emperor Dong's palace control the cabinet, and he really thought that the existence of Beihai did more harm than good to Zhongzhou state. He tried his best to correct these mistakes, but he failed. And in the current situation where there was still a little turning point, he still did not give up. He wanted to let the country go on the right path that he thought. Even if he sacrificed most of the interests of the prince group, even if he fully cooperated with the academics. As long as he could contain Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai, he could do anything. He would lose his reputation, die soon, and be infamous for thousands of years. He was no longer thinking about these now. What he was thinking about was what to do in the future of Zhongzhou state. Guo Wentian sighed softly, and he became more and more powerless. He understood Chen Fangqing and admired him as well. He knew what kind of person Chen Fangqing was a long time ago. He could not think about the prince group, but he could not. Now, I'm the only one left, Guo Wentian said in a complicated tone. I have no choice but to make a choice. Chen Fangqing shook his head and said in a deep voice, my end will not be good. Chen Fangqing shook his head and said, but I have never regretted what I have done before. If possible, I will continue to do it. No matter what happens to me, at least now, I am still in this position and can still play some role. If you don't have a better way, then I suggest you follow my way. Even from the group's point of view, this may cause heavy losses, but it is much better than waiting for Li Tianlan to grow up and completely break up our group. Guo Wentian clenched his fists hard and did not speak. Chen Fangqing suddenly smiled and said, you don't have to be the bad guy. Even if Li Tianlan arrives in Yuzhou, will he come to kill me right away? We still have some time. The group is so big, and I am in a bad situation. I am afraid that not many people are willing to listen to me, but there are always people who can listen to me. I will express my attitude. I will talk to the president, and I will do the work for Wang Qinglei. This time we may have made a big concession, but the future can still be stable. Chen Fangqing paused and smiled again. Next, no matter what Li Tianlan does, I will take it. Chapter 1073. When Guo Wentian left, he was silent and did not say goodbye to Chen Fangqing. He took a deep look at this old partner of his, then quietly walked out. Chen Fangqing sat in his seat motionless, as if he had fallen into eternal meditation. He looked focused and even a little dead. Time passed by. The secretary pushed the door open and came in. Chen Fangqing still sat there without any reaction. It was Yuan Lin who opened the door. As the chief secretary of the cabinet who had been with Chen Fangqing for 10 years, he was very familiar with Chen Fangqing's posture. Chen Fangqing liked to think quietly. Whenever he encountered a problem, he would shut himself in the office, not talking, not eating, not drinking, and not even moving. In Yuan Lin's memory, he had seen Chen Fangqing's posture many times, and he would also see how tired and busy he was after that. Every time after he was meditating like this, the whole secretariat would basically work overtime all night to collect all kinds of information and documents, sort out the records of his conversations with the feudal officials of various places, collect some special local information, development plans, the use of funds, and then some discussion records at the meeting of the parliament, and so on. When the secretariat was busy, Chen Fangqing would usually draft a report by himself based on the information collected by the secretariat. At the beginning of the report, it might be some insignificant things, but Chen Fangqing would keep writing. He didn't care if it was messy or contradictory. He would keep writing and write out all the things he thought in his heart. Then, combined with the information, he would slowly improve, modify, delete, and add some content. Chen Fangqing didn't like to use the secretary to write the report. He preferred to write it by himself. Even if it was messy at the beginning, as he kept writing, his thinking would become more and more flexible, his attention would become more and more focused, and he would keep writing until he got close to the central idea. Chen Fangqing's work and rest were the most chaotic among all the directors. He was older, but he was extremely energetic. The secretariat could change shifts, but he could keep working. The manuscripts he revised repeatedly by himself were sometimes stored, and sometimes they were taken to the cabinet meeting for discussion. Then they were discussed in the parliament. If they didn't pass the discussion, They would be stored again, and those that passed the discussion would become practical policies and be implemented. Reform new policies many times, many policies. Zhongzhou state was changing little by little, very subtle but obviously perceptible changes. Chen Fangqing enjoyed it. Even though most of his reports were not passed by the Senate, he never gave up or became discouraged. Day after day, he never gave up. As the Prime Minister, he controlled the cabinet, represented Zhongzhou state, and drove the changes of the entire Zhongzhou state with his thoughts. 10 years felt like one day. Everything was still vivid in his mind. As Chen Fangqing's secretary, Yuan Lin did not deny that Chen Fangqing had done something wrong. But for the sake of Zhongzhou state, Chen Fangqing had indeed done the utmost in many aspects. Such a person should be respected, even if there were times when he really did something wrong. Even if they were not forgiven, they should be respected, instead of being quickly and completely forgotten and ignored by the entire Zhongzhou state as it was now. Night fell. Li Tianlan had already entered the capital. Yuan Lin could totally imagine Chen Fangqing's situation next. Perhaps before dawn, some of Chen Fangqing's decisions would be overturned. The cabinet departments would begin to test Chen Fangqing's bottom line, and then there would be some vague provocations. The report would bypass Chen Fangqing in the shortest time. His orders would be quickly ignored. This kind of disregard would become opposition in a few days or even half a month. Time was like a line, slowly moving forward. Opposition would become provocation, ridicule, and doubt. Doubt would become investigation. As a result, things that were unfavorable to Chen Fangqing were dug out one by one. The wind was rising and the clouds were surging, and the wind was changing. From the news to the media, one article after another with a purpose began to appear. All the supporting forces of Chen Fangqing would gradually leave him. Then the people who had originally supported him would change their attitudes. They would ignore him, oppose him, resist him, provoke him, and ridicule him. Countless certificates of allegiance would fly in different directions. The final investigation would show relatively clear results one after another. In the end, they would retire in advance. Any reason could be because of physical reasons, or because of something else. Then the results of the investigation would explode one day before the election. Chen Fangqing's reputation was ruined. The Prince Group was on the verge of collapse and even fell apart. Chen Fangqing was hated by everyone. He would lose his reputation and completely withdraw from today's stage in the most dishonorable way. That would be the time for Emperor Dong's palace to take action. He would die without a complete corpse, and his family would be ruined. Everything would be irrelevant, because no one cared. This seemed to be Chen Fangqing's destiny. But was such an ending really what the old man in front of him should have? At this moment, when everything was doomed, what was Chen Fangqing, who had a miserable ending, thinking about now? Yuan Lin took 2 steps forward. He was Chen Fangqing's secretary and absolute confidant. Chen Fangqing's ending was miserable, and naturally, he would not be much better. Today, Yuan Lin's heart was extremely flustered. But at this time, after approaching Chen Fangqing, his heart suddenly became calm. He took a few steps forward and walked to Chen Fangqing's side. He bowed slightly and whispered, "Prime Minister." Chen Fangqing subconsciously straightened his body a little and glanced at Yuan Lin. "Have you eaten?" Chen Fangqing smiled. All the anger, unwillingness, and worry seemed to have been taken away by Guo Wentian. At this moment, Chen Fangqing became completely calm. Yuan Lin glanced at the dinner on the table that had long been cold and shook his head. "Not yet." Chen Fangqing patted Yuan Lin's arm casually and said with a smile, "You've worked hard. Well, let the kitchen prepare 2 working meals. We'll get off work after eating." Yuan Lin hesitated and whispered, "Prime Minister, I just received news that Li Tianlan is already on his way here. According to the speed of the car, it will take about 45 minutes for him to arrive at the Hidden Dragon Sea." Li Tianlan went directly to the Hidden Dragon Sea as soon as he arrived in Yuzhou. He did not go to the Bai family to find Bai Zhanfang, the army headquarters to find Dong Qingwudi, or the cabinet to find Wu Jingmin. Instead, he went straight to the Hidden Dragon Sea. Everyone could feel the aggressive sharpness of Emperor Dong's palace. The situation after the final battle in North Sea was completely a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan had the title of Invincible Realm and the momentum of a great victory. At this time, his every move seemed to have a domineering spirit that could swallow thousands of miles. Even though he was beside Chen Fangqing, Yuan Lin's forehead was covered in cold sweat when he said this. Standing in their position and in their current situation, it was no exaggeration to say that the other party's every move was related to their future, even life and death. Those who were not in the game could not understand this at all. It was a kind of pressure. Chen Fangqing looked calm and said lightly, "Even if he came to the Hidden Dragon Sea, the first thing he did was not to come to me. There was always time for a meal." Yuan Lin took a deep breath, nodded, and called for 2 more working meals. "Come sit down." Chen Fangqing smiled and patted the seat beside him. "Little Yuan, you have been with me for a long time. I think you can understand my current situation even if I don't say it. After a while, I should retire. The affairs of the cabinet should be temporarily handled by Zhuang Huayang, the second minister. I have also thought about your arrangement, but I don't have a good idea. What about you? Do you have any plans? You can tell me." Yuan Lin was stunned and for a moment, he did not say anything. Plans? He really had no plans. There was still nearly a year before the election, but everyone knew that under such circumstances, Chen Fangqing did not have a year. At most 3 months, he would temporarily retire for some reason. It was also easy to find a superficial excuse, such as a physical problem that he needed to recuperate. Until the election, he was afraid that he would not have any chance to show up. Everyone in the Prince group was in a panic, and everyone wanted to keep their positions. As Chen Fangqing's secretary, no one but Chen Fangqing could care for him at this time. But Chen Fangqing could not protect himself, so what arrangements could he have for him? Yuan Lin now had a muddle-through mentality. He was very clear that when Chen Fangqing left, his political life was basically over. "You don't have to be too pessimistic," Chen Fangqing said with a smile. "If I fall this time, it will be very difficult for me to get up. But I am still in this position. No matter how precarious it is, I have to arrange for the people around me. Comrade Wen Tian will not ignore your life and death. You have the ability and courage. Your problems will always be solved. If you don't have any good plans, I have a few places to arrange for you. Go to the Ministry of Agriculture or the Ministry of Science. There is also a position in the Ministry of Health that is more suitable for you. If not, you can go back to Tianfu. You can choose one." Chen Fangqing's eyes were a little dazed. Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Science, Ministry of Health. Among the major departments in the cabinet, this was not a very important position, but it was not a dispensable position either. With his rank, if he went to these places, it was impossible for him to be the head, but he could be an important deputy. He could also contribute to the group, and it would not be as eye-catching as other sensitive departments. If Chen Fangqing's arrangement was when he was at his peak, it would naturally not be a good arrangement. When Chen Fangqing's influence was at its strongest, if his secretary was assigned to the major departments in the cabinet, such as Finance and Development Committee, Chen Fangqing could choose at will. But now, Chen Fangqing arranged for him to be in a few relatively ordinary departments, which was undoubtedly a kind of protection for him. I don't know. Yuan Lin smiled a little embarrassedly. "Prime Minister, you make the decision for me." "Then go to the Ministry of Science." Chen Fangqing thought for a moment and said slowly, "I will tell them. In a few days you will report there." There was a knock on the door. The staff of the Hidden Dragon Sea sent 2 working meals. Chen Fangqing seemed to have an appetite and said with a smile, "Eat first." His appetite did seem to have improved a lot, and he finished the entire working meal. Yuan Lin controlled his speed and got up almost at the same time as him. He whispered, "Prime Minister, where are you going?" "You can get off work." Chen Fangqing took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a deep breath and said slowly, "I'm going to have a chat with the president." Yuan Lin subconsciously wanted to stop him. He looked at the time. It was only 20 minutes before Li Tianlan arrived at the Hidden Dragon Sea. At this time, Li Huaqing might not want to see him. Even if he saw him, what could he do when Li Tianlan came? Was he going to humiliate himself? Chen Fangqing waved his hand and said slowly, "Some things have to be done, and some words have to be said." He walked out of the office, paused, and continued, "I almost forgot. You are working overtime. Sort out the documents in the second drawer. I will need them later." His voice paused, and then he laughed at himself. "I guess I will be very busy tonight." Yuan Lin nodded blankly. Chen Fangqing said no more, turned around and went out. Li Huaqing's office was not far from Chen Fangqing's office, about 200 or 300 meters away. It snowed in Yuzhou yesterday. The hidden dragon sea was covered with silver, beautiful, quiet, and solemn. Chen Fangqing greedily looked at every grass and tree in the hidden dragon sea, as if he wanted to remember everything here. He even stood on the shore of the hidden dragon sea for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then strode to the golden autumn garden, where Li Huaqing lived. The salute of the guard was still solemn and steady, but Ma Si, who was sitting outside the president's office, looked a little unnatural when he saw Chen Fangqing. When he saw the prime minister, he instinctively wanted to stand up, but he suddenly thought of something. His movement was a little slow, and his whole body looked extremely strange. "Prime Minister." Ma Si smiled, but his smile was a little ugly. Chen Fangqing remained calm and nodded slightly. He nodded slightly and asked, "Is the president here?" "Yes, but the president will meet a distinguished guest later. It's very important." "Prime Minister, you." Ma Si's voice was a little hesitant. If it was in the past, he wouldn't have said such a thing even if he was beaten to death. It could be seen what kind of position Chen Fangqing had in other people's hearts now. "I also have a very important thing," Chen Fangqing said unhurriedly. "What can be more important than national affairs?" Ma Si was speechless. Chen Fangqing's eyes looked very ordinary, but when they fell on him, there was always a kind of extremely fierce sharpness and weight. He subconsciously lowered his head and didn't speak anymore. Chen Fangqing stepped forward and pushed the door of the president's office with his own hands. Ma Si hesitated for a moment and didn't stop him. In the office, Li Huaqing looked at Chen Fangqing, who came in with some surprise. He was stunned for about 2 seconds before he nodded with a smile and said, "The Longjing tea has just been made. Come and have a taste." He naturally picked up a teacup and poured a cup of tea for Chen Fangqing. Chen Fangqing nodded and sat on the sofa. After a moment of silence, he let out a long breath. Li Huaqing slowly tasted the tea and didn't speak. In fact, long before the start of the decisive battle in North Sea, or more precisely, since the academics took the initiative to terminate the cooperation with the Prince Group, the relationship between the two had fallen to the freezing point. Although there were some exchanges at the meeting of the parliament, when they met in private at the hidden dragon sea, the two of them nodded at most, and no one spoke. "When will he arrive?" Chen Fangqing asked calmly. "We just talked on the phone 5 minutes ago." Li Huaqing smiled and said, "There is some traffic jam on the road. The comrades of the police department have already evacuated the traffic. The section to the hidden dragon sea is under traffic control. There are about 30 or 40 minutes left." "He really can't wait," Chen Fangqing sneered. "Seize every minute," Li Huaqing said meaningfully. His character has always been very direct. Besides, the new group involves too much. It seems that less than a year is plenty, but when it comes to operation, this time is actually very tight. Chen Fangqing was silent for a while, shook his head, and didn't bother to talk nonsense. In many people's eyes, he and Guo Wentian of the Prince Group had the same position, and they were old partners with great tacit understanding. But in fact, in Chen Fangqing's heart, Li Huaqing was his best partner. Most of Chen Fangqing's thoughts were devoted to the overall situation of Zhongzhou State, and sometimes he would sacrifice the interests of the Prince Group for the overall interests. Li Huaqing also had the overall situation in mind, so the two could reach an amazing consensus on many things. They knew each other very well. At this time, there was no point in being polite. "What does he want?" Chen Fangqing asked directly. When he chatted with Guo Wentian just guessed some things, and no one in the Prince Group knew the actual situation. But now the new group had become more and more obvious, and it was impossible for Li Huaqing not to know the demands of the new group. Now that Chen Fangqing was defeated, in the following time, the cooperation between the new group and the academics would be closer. In addition to Li Huaqing's position, he was now undoubtedly one of the people who could see the structure of the new group best. The smile on Li Huaqing's face paused slightly, and a touch of gloom flashed in his eyes. Chen Fangqing's heart began to sink. Seeing that Li Huaqing showed such a look, Chen Fangqing suddenly found that Li Tianlan's appetite might be bigger than he had expected, or even much bigger. Nanyue, Xie Jiang Nan Dongshan. Li Huaqing opened his mouth lightly. These can be given to him. Chen Fangqing said directly without the slightest hesitation. These 4 provinces were already in Li Tianlan's pocket. Everyone could see that, in the current situation of Zhongzhou state, it was the easiest to take these 4 provinces. Naturally, the new group would not let them go. If Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing couldn't stop them, then they would give them to him directly. What else? Chen Fangqing asked. Li Huaqing took a deep breath and pulled out a piece of paper from the document beside him with no expression on his face. There were a few rows of pen writing on the paper, and the ink was very fresh. Obviously, Li Huaqing had written it not long ago while thinking. Chen Fangqing took the paper from Li Huaqing's hand with rapt attention and glanced at it. Some very familiar words came into his eyes. He felt dizzy and the world was spinning. He almost instinctively took a cold breath. His heart began to beat violently. Chen Fangqing resisted the feeling of dizziness and looked at the paper carefully. This is also Li Tianlan's request. Chen Fangqing felt that the other party was simply crazy. His arms were trembling, and he held the paper in his hand tightly. He held it back and finally said, "Are you kidding me? How does it look like a joke?" Li Huaqing shook his head with a somewhat ugly face. When he heard Li Tianlan's request for the first time, he felt the same as Chen Fangqing. He thought it was a joke, and even thought that Li Tianlan was simply crazy. But after thinking about it carefully, even Li Huaqing felt a little helpless. These positions, these departments, look carefully, how many of them need us to give? And how many of them are already owned by Li Tianlan? Chen Fangqing's breathing was a little rapid. He had thought before that Li Tianlan only wanted 4 provinces for the right to speak in the cabinet, but when he really saw this piece of paper, he suddenly realized how crazy Li Tianlan was. This kind of appetite even made Chen Fangqing somewhat doubt life. On this piece of paper written by Li Huaqing were the departments and their positions. Most of them were cabinet positions, involving multiple departments. Ministry of Finance, Development Commission, Ministry of Security, Ministry of Law, Ministry of Police, Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Industry, Bank of Zhongzhou, Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Examination, Customs, all departments. To be exact, all the key departments. In the series of positions, they were either the first or the second in command. If such a gorgeous list was implemented, it meant that the combination of Wu Zhengmin and Bai Qingqian would have an almost absolute advantage in the cabinet. Such an advantage, to put it a little exaggeration, was even unprecedented since the founding of the People's Republic. This series of departments and positions was enough to make anyone's blood pressure rise and head dizzy. Absolutely can't agree. Chen Fangqing suppressed his voice and enunciated each word clearly. Li Huaqing looked at him silently and lit a cigarette. When he first heard these requirements, he was also shocked and his blood was boiling. But when he calmed down and thought about it, he smoked and slowly shook his head. If Wu Zhengmin wants to come up, the Development Commission is under his charge, so there's no way to fight for it. The current minister of the Ministry of Security is Li Qingye, who was promoted by the giant group 2 years ago. She did a good job, so there's no way to fight for it. The police department has always been one of the core departments of the North Group. This time, it will enter the scope of the new group, so there's no way to fight for it. In terms of finance, Wu Zhengmin has a certain right to speak, and the giant group also has great power in this regard. We always have to express some support for the new group, so we can't block some places. At the moment, the most important thing is the Bank of Zhongzhou, Customs and Examination. These can be discussed, but if none of them enter, it's obviously impossible, and things will be a little difficult. Even if it's difficult, we have to do it, Chen Fangqing said in a deep voice. Li Huaqing nodded. I think so too. What do you suggest? Chen Fangqing asked slowly after a moment of silence. Suggestion. Li Huaqing looked at Chen Fangqing deeply. In the smoke, his voice was erratic but with incomparable firmness. I hope you can do something. His voice was calm and straightforward. I think you don't care about this now. Chen Fangqing was silent for a moment before he smiled. I see. Li Huaqing's meaning was easy to understand. Chen Fangqing's fate was doomed. No matter what he did, there would be no change. But now he still sat in this position, so Li Huaqing hoped that Chen Fangqing could jump out and be the villain to stop the momentum of Li Tianlan and the new group. This would make Chen Fangqing's situation more passive and more miserable. But what did it matter? No matter how miserable he was, he could not escape death. The only thing he needed to care about was that the Prince Group would lose more because of Chen Fangqing's reckless behavior. But when Zhongzhou State and the Prince Group were put together, what was the latter? Chen Fangqing was silent for a moment and nodded. I'll do it. Li Huaqing nodded with satisfaction. Of course, pay attention to the way. Tianlan and the new group are extremely important to Zhongzhou State. What you need to do is to give them less, not to give them nothing. It's good for Zhongzhou State to let them gain a foothold. Chen Fangqing's heart, which had just been warmed up, suddenly became cold. He sat where he was for a while before he nodded and said, The atmosphere was silent again, becoming oppressive and solidified. After a long time, Chen Fangqing suddenly said, If the Prince Group fully supports Zhuang Huayang's promotion, how sure are you? Chapter 1074. This question was heavy and straightforward, concise and to the point. Even Li Huaqing was stunned for nearly half a minute. Chen Fangqing was not in a hurry, quietly waiting for the other party's reply. Li Huaqing came back to his senses, but he did not speak. Instead, he began to think quietly. The Prince Group fully supported Hua Xingyang. This was a question that the academics had never considered before, because everyone thought it was unlikely. The Prince Group was a supergroup that had existed since the founding of the People's Republic. It had ups and downs, but it had never fallen out of the ranks of the top groups. Among the six, the Prince Group had the longest history, the most profound foundation, and the extremely solid foundation in all aspects. Even today, the Prince Group maintained a very close relationship with some retired but still had a strong influence on the old people. This was a fatal disadvantage that the academics, a new group that had a short time to rise, did not have. And the existence of those old people not only had a strong influence on the Prince Group, but also on different members of the six. However, with the rise of the new group, the Prince Group would inevitably be greatly weakened, and all aspects would be affected. The reason why the Prince Group could exist since the founding of the People's Republic, and always be in the ranks of the top groups, was that each of their leaders had a very strong group concept. To explain it in an inaccurate but easy-to-understand term, the so-called group concept was selfishness. This kind of concept would overemphasize the group's future, protect its shortcomings, and cause some short-sighted decisions. But at the same time, such a concept would greatly strengthen the cohesion within the group. Chen Fangqing was definitely an outlier in the Prince Group. But Guo Wentian took this concept to the extreme. Simply put, in the overall situation of Zhongzhou State and the group's future, Chen Fangqing would think that the overall situation of Zhongzhou State was overriding. In Guo Wentian's heart, he also thought that the overall situation of Zhongzhou State was more important, but that was all. So even if he had a seemingly correct understanding, he would always consider some internal problems of the group in some decisions and implementation. Outsiders had no right to judge whether this concept was right or wrong. Li Huaqing was not qualified either. But Li Huaqing had the vision to see clearly how the Prince Group would choose in this situation. The Prince Group was now really in a precarious situation. According to their past habits, at this time, the most important thing they should do was to completely withdraw their wings, throw away all the interests that they were reluctant to give up but had to give up, and plan their future. According to their strategic goals, after this election, their biggest demand was to occupy 2 places on the Council of Zhongzhou State, which would also be the goal they would strive for after giving up Chen Fangqing. At present, Guo Wentian would continue to be re-elected, and the candidate for the other council member still needed their internal coordination and research. Under such circumstances, they needed enough time to straighten out all kinds of relationships, so as to save as many things as possible. Not to mention supporting the academics. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for them to intervene in anything other than the internal problems of the Prince group. They would only do their best to achieve their own goals. Now Chen Fangqing asked him how confident Hua Zhengyang was if he got the full support of Prince group. The key was, how much support was this so-called full support? Li Huaqing thought silently, and he suddenly found it difficult to answer this question. Every election was filled with turbulent times. Whether it was those who could be re-elected, or those who were striving for a higher position, no one could be alone. Competition was everywhere. Even if they could continue to be re-elected, they had to carefully think about how they should express their attitude in the situation, what attitude they should express, and how they should express their attitude. In countless competitions, there would always be one position that became the focus of all the competition. It was the same in this election. Before the final battle in North Sea, the competition between Yi Dongsheng and Wang Qinglei was the core focus. This kind of competition lasted for nearly 2 years, and the activities of both sides were extremely frequent. It even caused some internal turmoil in the Southeast group, which could be said to be a joke to outsiders. Now that the final battle in North Sea was over, it meant that Wang Qinglei was automatically out. But the focus of the competition did not disappear. Instead, with the vacancy of Chen Fangqing, the focus of the competition directly shifted to the position of the head of the cabinet. The Prince group now had no suitable candidate to compete for this position. The new group had risen for a short time, and it also did not have this ability. The North group of Eternal Soy Sauce was busy trying to integrate with the new group. The giant group could not push out a competitive candidate to compete for this position for the time being. Everyone knew that the new Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State was either from the academics or from the Southeast group. Wen Siyuan, the Speaker of Beihai, a member of Zhongzhou State. Hua Zhengyang, the Deputy Prime Minister of the Cabinet. At present, these two were the most promising candidates for this position. Each had its advantages and disadvantages. In terms of ability, no matter who it was, they were absolutely qualified to be the Prime Minister. Hua Zhengyang's advantage was that he had served as the Deputy Prime Minister for 1 term, and was more familiar with the cabinet. In this position, it was tantamount to taking advantage of the situation. From a deputy to a top leader, there was no need for running in. His disadvantage was that Li Huaqing would be re-elected. The number 1 and 2 figures were both from the academics, which would undoubtedly make others extremely uneasy. With uneasiness, there would naturally be backlash and opposition. And Wen Siyuan's advantage was that he could get a lot of support more easily. The giant group, the new group, the North group, and the Southeast group all preferred Wen Siyuan to be in this position. His disadvantage was that his position was not as competitive as Hua Zhengyang's. But if the academics could get the full support of the Prince group, the situation was completely different. The current Prince group and the academics were no longer the Prince group and the academics more than 2 years ago. Similarly, the current giant group and the Southeast group were no longer the giant group and the Southeast group more than 2 years ago. In the past 2 years, the two groups, the Southeast group and the giant group, had constantly compromised and completed the internal reshuffle and change of blood. The cooperation between Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing was aggressive. They took advantage of the time when the other party changed blood and shuffled the cards. The power of the two groups had been greatly expanded, and the power of the Southeast group and the giant group had been greatly locked. It was no exaggeration to say that when Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing stood together, they now represented the 2 largest groups in Zhongzhou State. If they fully cooperated, the possibility of pushing Hua Zhengyang to the top. Li Huaqing thought for a while and finally confirmed a fact. If they fully cooperated, the possibility of Hua Zhengyang being promoted was very great. Really? Li Huaqing asked in a deep voice. I just met Wen Tian. Chen Fangqing said lightly. I'm sitting here now, representing more than myself. If it were before, Chen Fangqing wouldn't have said it, and Li Huaqing wouldn't have asked. But now whether Chen Fangqing could still represent the Prince Group became a very serious question, so serious that he had to seriously emphasize it. If that's the case, the possibility of Zhengyang being promoted is very high. Li Huaqing said slowly, at least 80% sure. 80% sure? Chen Fangqing muttered to himself and then smiled. I thought I was 100% sure, which was lower than expected. But in fact 80% is not low. There is no absolute in the world. How can there be a 100% success rate? Li Huaqing shook his head. How are you going to operate? It's a little difficult, but I can still do it. Chen Fangqing subconsciously rubbed his forehead. His headache had been continuing today. Instead of being relieved, the pain became more and more intense each time. Maybe he should go to the hospital. It just so happened that he would be free soon. Chen Fangqing laughed at himself in his heart, but his voice was still calm. Wen Tian and I will unify the voices of the group in the shortest time possible. Now the comrades are a little restless. It's not good to be too impetuous. Yes, we are already very passive. We can't be the first to be chaotic. Li Huaqing said with deep thought. Who do you think is more optimistic about in the Prince Group? Wen Tian is experienced and steady. I think it's relatively easy to find someone who can cooperate with him in the group. Chen Fangqing suddenly asked with a smile. Li Huaqing was stunned for less than a second before he reacted. There was no doubt that this was the condition put forward by Chen Fangqing. Or the Prince Group. The Prince Group would fully support Hua Zhenyang, and in return, the academics must fully support another member of the Prince Group to become a director of Zhongzhou State, even if his ranking was lower. To be honest, the result of the alliance between the Prince Group and the academics was that both Hua Zhenyang and the candidate director of the Prince Group would be resisted by the other groups. If they didn't cooperate, the other groups would focus on Hua Zhenyang. After getting a satisfactory result, even the new groups wouldn't pursue the Prince Group. Undoubtedly, it was easier for them to achieve their demands. Now they had the academics as an ally, but they had a few more enemies for no reason. This was not the safest way, but it was the most compromise. So Li Huaqing did not hesitate and immediately laughed. This is your own business. In my opinion, several comrades are relatively qualified. I'm afraid you and Wen Tian have something to discuss. This statement was very clear. Chen Fangqing nodded. Li Huaqing could not criticize the candidates of the Prince Group. His statement that several comrades were qualified was already a very clear attitude. Let's go back and discuss it, Chen Fangqing said. Li Huaqing nodded with a smile, and his eyes were a little twinkling. He suddenly realized that this cooperation with the Prince Group was a last resort for Chen Fangqing, but for the academics, there was suddenly a lot more room for operation. The sudden increase of leeway meant that even if Hua Zhenyang failed, he could guarantee that the academics would not lose anything. All kinds of thoughts flashed in his mind for a moment, and then he heard Chen Fangqing's voice again. At present, it seems that there are still a lot of things to solve in the Southeast Group. Wang Qinglei can't go to Beihai this time, but his status is there. In addition, it is said that Wang Xiaorao has reached the peak of the invincible realm. They also have a lot of hidden dangers inside. Although my decision did not succeed, in a sense, it also slowed down the pace of the Wang family of Beihai. In the next few years, they should focus on stability and not be too radical. His voice paused for a second and then he continued. Now the one who should be worried, or even vigilant, is Li Tianlan. Nanyue, Xie, Jiangnan Dongshan. Before and after this election, 4 provinces will fall into his hands, which is enough to form the basic framework of a new group. But don't forget, the resources in his hands are not only 4 provinces, but also Jiangxia. The area of 5 provinces is enough for the new group to complete the primitive accumulation and rise quickly. In fact, I have learned about the new group in detail before. Although their talent reserve is a little insufficient, in some aspects, it is already very perfect. Now there is Zhou Yuanshan in Jiangxia, and the new group has taken over Nanyue, which is equivalent to completely paving the way for Zhou Yuanshan to enter the parliament, and even become a director. In the future, when Tiannan officially becomes a province, Ning Qianqing will also enter the parliament. Now Wu Jingmin and Bai Qingqian can work for 1 term. Wu Zhengmin is old and will retire after one term. Bai Qingqian can take advantage of the situation, and Zhou Yuanshan can be transferred to Nanyue, so he can naturally become a member. After one term, Bai Qingqian is very likely to continue to be re-elected. After all, she is not old. At that time, Zhou Yuanshan can take a step up to become a director. At that time, Chen Fongqing thought about it and smiled coldly. At that time, Tiannan will basically become Tiannan province, and Ning Qianqing will become a member of Zhongzhou state, plus the new speaker of Nanyue, and the North group that has completed the initial integration. 10 years. The clearest thing we can see now is 10 years. 10 years later, the new group will become a supergroup with 2 directors, and at least 3 members of parliament. At least 3 members of parliament. President, don't you have any feelings about such a scale? What do you mean? Li Huaqing looked up at Chen Fongqing. He knew more than Chen Fongqing. In the current situation, having 2 directors of Zhongzhou state was indeed a configuration that only top groups could have, but the configuration of 3 members of parliament was slightly insufficient. If it was 10 years later, in his expectation, the new group would have 2 directors of Zhongzhou State Council, and about 5 to 7 members of parliament. If only looking at the high-level strength, this was basically the configuration of the academics and the Prince Group today. After Li Tianlan owned the Flourishing Age Fund, it was not only the North Group that was annexed and integrated, but the power of the giant group was also gradually approaching the new group. From this point of view, the comprehensive influence of the new group was already top. With Wu Zhengmin, although Dongqing Wudi was the leader of the giant group, he could also be regarded as a major pillar of the new group. However, Li Huaqing had long let go of his dissatisfaction. The current situation might not be what he wanted to see, but no matter what, such a thing had happened in the end. He had tried to stop it, and so had Chen Fongqing, but they did not succeed. In this case, Li Huaqing could only welcome their rise and do his best to guide them to play the right role and move in the right direction. The new group, Emperor Dong's palace Li Tianlan, this is already a problem that cannot be ignored. I can say with certainty that the existence of Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace is even more dangerous to Zhongzhou state than the Wang family of Beihai. We must try our best to compress his existence space and reduce his sense of existence. Otherwise, the consequences will be unpredictable. The most obvious example is that Beihai is Beihai of Zhongzhou state. But what did the people on Mount Dibing do? Chen Fongqing's tone was a little excited. Beihai has so many resources: oil, natural gas, all kinds of minerals, forests, land resources, and even water resources. How much has Beihai swallowed over so many years? How much has it given to Zhongzhou state? Less than 60% on average. This 60% is shared by a country, and Beihai can get 40%. They are completely lying on the blood vessels of Zhongzhou state to suck blood. Beihai has the best water source in the world, and they are 100% monopolizing it. Have you seen the market survey of the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Commerce 2 years ago? Every year, part of the mineral water sold by Beihai to Zhongzhou state costs more than 200 yuan per barrel, close to 300 yuan. They say it's water for nobles. Nobles. How can there be nobles in Zhongzhou state? There is no King nobles. On the land of Zhongzhou state, every grass and every tree belongs to the country and the people. How dare they? How dare they? And the land? The land of 150,000 square kilometers in Beihai can only support less than 20 million people. The cabinet has been paying attention to this matter. I paid attention to it when I was in office. My predecessor, and even my predecessor, were thinking about this problem. In the most beautiful province of Zhongzhou state, the transfer of people's household registration is more complicated than immigration. Now the little bastard Wang Shengshao even closed this channel. How dense is the population of Zhongzhou state? How tight are the land resources? The cabinet issues policies every day and discusses them every year. Is it useful? Zhongzhou state doesn't want to occupy the land of Beihai. I can understand the treaty of that year. Zhongzhou state is willing to spend money and buy it. Beihai belongs to Zhongzhou state. We just want Beihai to develop more reasonably. Is that wrong? What did Wang Tianzong say? Not for sale. There is no room for negotiation at all. Beihai is not a big agricultural province. Its tertiary industry is developed and its land planting area is very small, because Beihai is rich and can be bought outside. What do they use the land for? If these lands are handed over to Zhengzhou State for overall planning, we can move at least 40 to 60 million people to Beihai, at least. And it won't bring too much change to Beihai. The Ministry of Construction has plans to build houses, schools, hospitals, and traffic networks. They are absolutely reasonable. But what does Mount Dibbing want to do with Beihai? They build F***king parks, plant flowers and grass, and cultivate forests. The whole province is full of flowers. The green area is even much larger than the residential area. What do they want to do? What do they want to do? They made Beihai the most beautiful province, the most comfortable province, and the happiest province. But does all this have anything to do with Zhengzhou State? Does it have anything to do with it? Mount Dibbing wants to use these things to bind everyone in Beihai, for loyalty, cohesion, and a sense of belonging. Ha ha ha. What is the self-introduction of people in Beihai when they walk in Zhengzhou State or any country in the world? Am I from Zhengzhou State? No, there is no such saying. They will say that I am from Beihai, Beihai. They have the most comfortable living environment, the most beautiful province, the most relaxed life, the highest salary, the lowest housing price, the fairest environment, and the most leisurely holidays. Aristocrats. The aristocratic province of Zhengzhou State? F***ck. He talked incessantly. Chen Fangqing had already seen his ending, so at this moment he seemed to want to say all the words that he had been suppressing in his heart. His voice was completely roaring, as if he wanted to tear the roof off. His loud voice was so loud that even Ma Si, who was outside, could hear it clearly. Li Huaqing silently watched him vent his emotions almost hysterically. His eyes were quiet, with a touch of pity. I've had enough of this Beihai. Chen Fangqing took several deep breaths and continued. I wanted to smash it, but I failed. And now there is another Tiannan. There are signs of this in Tiannan now. If it continues to develop, it will be even more excessive than Beihai. Xianyuan City and even the whole Tiannan need fewer people. They all want the best. They will use the resources of Zhengzhou State to build their own foundation. If we don't restrict it, Emperor Dong's palace will be as arrogant as Beihai is at its peak. Li Huaqing was silent for a long time before he slowly exhaled and calmly said, There is a problem that you have forgotten. What? Chen Fangqing frowned. Beihai belongs to Zhengzhou State. Li Huaqing said, Tiannan will also belong to Zhengzhou State in the future. You have always been very attached to this concept, but have you ever thought that without the Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace, Beihai province would still belong to Snow Country and East Island, and Tiannan would still belong to Annan? If they didn't bring these to Zhengzhou State, then whether it is Beihai or Tiannan, it has nothing to do with us. This is their family property, their bottom line. They entered Zhengzhou State with land that doesn't belong to Zhengzhou State, and they only ask for a certain degree of autonomy, which is reasonable. Chen Fangqing froze. He froze for a full 5 minutes before he gritted his teeth and reluctantly said, So what? Even if there is no Beihai or Emperor Dong's palace, I believe there will be other forces. That's right, Li Huaqing said blandly. Then it will be another Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace. In essence, there will be no difference. Anyone who can reach their level will make these demands, no less, only more excessive. This is the foundation that they have worked hard for. Why should they give it to Zhengzhou State unconditionally? They are willing to return to Zhengzhou State because they are from Zhengzhou State. Even if they are saints, they don't give it for free. Put yourself in their shoes. If you stand in Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong's point of view, will you be willing to see all this? But they have gone too far. Chen Fangqing gritted his teeth and said, Yes. Li Huaqing nodded and said, They did have something wrong, so we cooperated before. If we can completely take back Beihai according to your idea, of course I will support it. This has nothing to do with right or wrong, it's just a standpoint. But now the situation is very obvious. We don't have that kind of ability, so we can only accept the reality. In general, whether it is for Beihai or Emperor Dong's palace, I welcome it. including their blatant theft of the country? Blatant theft of the country's resources. Chen Fangqing sneered. They don't steal the country. Li Huaqing shook his head and said, maybe you haven't noticed, whether it is Beihai or Emperor Dong's palace, they are very clear-headed. What they do is at most use the resources of a country to run a place. To be exact, they use a part of the limited resources of a country to run a place. For example, Beihai and Tiannan. But what about Jiang Shangyu, who cooperated with you? The fierceness in Li Huaqing's eyes flashed away. He intends to use a part of his limited resources to run a country. What virtue does he have? Does he deserve it? What he did is the real theft of the country, and you actually cooperated with such a person. This is what disappoints me the most. Chen Fangqing's body suddenly stiffened, and he suddenly found that he couldn't say a word. Li Huaqing took a deep look at him, exhaled, and looked up at the time. At the same time he looked up, the door of the office was knocked. The door was slowly pushed open, and Ma Si, Li Huaqing's secretary, came in. He looked at the two giants sitting in the office and said softly, President, His Majesty Li Tianlan is here. Chapter 1075. Ma Si stood straight at the door. When he reported to Li Huaqing, he never looked at Chen Fangqing out of the corner of his eyes. The smoke lingered in the office. Li Huaqing nodded. He stood up at the same time and looked at Chen Fangqing. Chen Fangqing also stood up. Li Huaqing thought he was going to leave, but Chen Fangqing said flatly, since we are here, we have to see each other. Li Huaqing smiled and said nothing. He got up and walked out of the office. Chen Fangqing followed him expressionlessly, a little behind Li Huaqing by half a body. The hidden dragon sea outside the office was silvery white, and the air was bitterly cold. Standing in front of the office door and looking out, on an arch bridge 100 meters away, Li Tianlan was taking off his gorgeous windbreaker that terrified the whole dark world, and putting it on Qin Weibai. The black windbreaker fluttered lazily. Qin Weibai naturally took his arm. Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing watched in silence, with complicated feelings. 5 years. In less than 6 years, the young couple in sight, or the young couple, completed the identity exchange without anyone realizing. More than 5 years ago, Li Tianlan was 19 and Qin Weibai was 24. At that time, Li Tianlan was a greenhorn, but he was not unknown. With the last remaining light of the Li family, he tried his best to show his edge, but not many people really paid attention to him. That year, Qin Weibai had already taken control of the Samsara Palace. She was the only will of the Samsara Palace when the will of the master of Samsara Palace was silent. She was quiet, low-key, and busy most of the time. The development of Zhongzhou State, the European continent, America, and the Samsara Palace reflected her will everywhere. It might not be clear, but it always existed. She rarely appeared in any so-called high-end circle, but no one in the real high-end circle would ignore her. She was the goddess in countless people's hearts and the first beauty in Zhongzhou State. There were countless people who admired her, but few dared to stand in front of her and look directly into her eyes. Wang Xiaorao of the Wang family of Beihai, Jiang Qianyan of the Jiang family of South America, 2 princes in the European Union, young business tycoons, those so-called big shots who seemed to have everything, with their family background, strength, and elegance, had never received any response from her. She lingered in everyone's most beautiful and dreamy dreams, quiet, beautiful, picturesque, and beautiful. No one knew what was going on with Li Tianlan, or what kind of luck he had. The heir of the Li family? The young heavenly son? These seemingly worthless things at that time did not bring Li Tianlan any honor, but they secretly caused a lot of trouble. At that time, the 19-year-old Li Tianlan was even funny in the eyes of many real bigwigs. At that time, Li Tianlan of the mountain, the Li of the Ming of palace of the world. The perfect goddess appeared beside him, unscrupulously blossoming with astonishing brilliance. In just a few short years, she filled the entire dark world. In the final battle of Heaven Capital, the purgatory of Heaven Capital rose. Then came the chaos of Snow Country. Zhongzhou State, Snow Country, 5 European countries, Dark Knights, Rothschild, Holy Land, Men in Black, Fantasy World, Jiang family of South America, Shadow Throne, one superpower after another, one country after another, hundreds of thousands of troops. The whole world was in turmoil. Reki City Mormon's blood flowed like a river. That was the most bloody and cruel end of the last era. Invincible like grass. The famous experts on the divine and holy list were dying. That was the end of the era. It was not the end. Instead, it completely shattered the whole structure of the whole era in a way that no one could imagine. The light of the eternal sword above Mormons, with the lingering sound of that era, shattered all the shadows, and directly opened the door to a new era. Just like now, the era and sky that belonged to Li Tianlan. The final battle in Beihai might not be the plan of Samsara Palace, nor was it Qin Weibai's doing. But everyone knew very well that when the eternal sword light pierced Wang Tianzong's chest above Mormon's, the final battle in Beihai had become inevitable. There was no need to plan anything, no need to push anything. Whether Wang Tianzong was seriously injured or killed, the final battle in Beihai was bound to happen. So the last invincible realm experts of East Island and Holy Land all died in the final battle in Beihai. The Jiang family of South America fell. Most of the forces in the Dark World disappeared. The whole Dark World was in ruins. In the ruins, the dynasty belonging to Emperor Dong's palace was being built. It was clear and ferocious, with its claws and teeth unstoppable. That year, Li Tianlan was 24 years old. Qin Weibai was 29 years old. In more than 5 years, Li Tianlan had matured, become powerful, and invincible in a flash. Qin Weibai didn't change at all. Time didn't leave any trace on her, but it took away the sharpness that she had never exposed in front of others. Today, she lived in the headquarters of the Lin clan, and stood aloof from the world. Beside Li Tianlan, she was gentle and charming. In a trance, it seemed that she no longer had the shadow that stirred up the whole dark world. She was gradually being ignored, and she was willing to do so. But Li Tianlan stood on the top of the world, invincible. The identity and status between the two seemed to have changed a long time ago. But only at this time, when the young couple officially appeared in the Hidden Dragon Sea and stood in front of Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing, when the well-behaved Qin Weibai and the indifferent Li Tianlan stood together, the impact became particularly strong, like a huge wave, fiercely hitting the consciousness of Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing. In a trance, Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai had come over. Ma Si coughed. Li Huaqing quickly came to his senses, touched Chen Fangqing, walked down the steps, and reached out to shake hands with Li Tianlan. Welcome, you two. Qin Weibai stood beside Li Tianlan, smiled gently and quietly, and didn't say anything. You're welcome, President. Li Tianlan smiled, turned his eyes, and fell on Chen Fangqing. Chen Fangqing stood silently, without reaching out or smiling, just looking at him expressionlessly. What are you doing here? Li Tianlan frowned and asked him politely. It's just a coincidence. Chen Fangqing said indifferently. The two sides had really shed all pretenses of cordiality, and they would really fight to the death. If it was in public for the sake of the overall situation, the two might pretend, but in this situation, there was no need for politeness between them. I'm the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State. Isn't it normal to discuss work with the President? But Your Highness, as soon as you arrived in Yuzhou, you can't wait to come to the Hidden Dragon Sea. Your manners are ugly, and it's inevitable that you lose your demeanor. I asked Tianlan to bring me here. Qin Weibai smiled and said softly, I'm a woman, and I never care about demeanor. I'm just a little curious, and I want to see what the Prime Minister, who has been targeting my man for the past 2 years, will look like now. If I hadn't met you here, I think we would have taken the initiative to visit later. Your current expression, compared with your last expression, should be very interesting. You. Chen Fangqing's face turned livid. Qin Weibai's voice was too gentle and too straightforward, so straightforward that even Chen Fangqing felt a little powerless to refute. He was silent for a few seconds, and then said with a gloomy face, When men talk, when it's a woman's turn to interrupt? He glanced at Li Tianlan, and still called him with that somewhat harsh title. Your Highness, you really have a good upbringing. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed and he said gloomily, Who do you think you are? How dare you judge my woman? In the power center of Zhongzhou State, looking at the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State and asking him what he was, This was simply the first time in the world, and it was a humiliation that didn't need to be emphasized too much. Not to mention how Chen Fangqing felt. Even Li Huaqing, who was beside him, felt offended. He was a little unhappy, but he had completely understood Li Tianlan's attitude. Strong, tough. Such an attitude also meant that on the topic of the new group, there were many things that Li Tianlan was not going to leave any room for compromise at all. You two, enough is enough. We don't meet here to quarrel. Li Huaqing said slowly. You're right. Li Tianlan nodded. I just want him to recognize himself. At such an old age, how dare he talk about upbringing here shamelessly? His own precious daughter is nearly 50 years old, and she has 9 lovers outside, 5 of whom are students at school. I have all kinds of high-definition videos of all kinds of information here. How about it, Prime Minister? Do you want me to send you a copy? Or should I make it public on the internet? Upbringing. Do you also know what upbringing is? How dare you? Chen Fangqing growled, and his face was ferocious. A touch of blood and sweetness gushed out of his throat, and he swallowed it down. Tearing. The blood seemed to tear the blood vessels, and he felt cold all over. He had a splitting headache, and his whole head began to become numb in the severe pain. I will do that, Li Tianlan said lightly, but after you get out of this position, I will give you an absolutely satisfactory explanation for the 62 people in your Chen family. Tianlan. Li Huaqing's tone suddenly became a little heavier. This is Hidden Dragon Sea. His eyes were quiet and dignified, with an obvious warning. Li Tianlan sneered and walked directly up the steps with Qin Weibai. Ma Si bowed slightly and opened the office door respectfully. Li Huaqing took a deep breath, patted Chen Fangqing on the shoulder, and turned back into the office without saying a word. The office door was closed. Chen Fangqing stood silently in the deep cold snow for a long time. The smoke in the office had not dissipated. Li Huaqing turned on the ventilation system, made a new pot of tea, and said with a smile, It's understandable that the Prime Minister is in a bad mood. Tianlan, there are many times and things that I can't stop you even if I want to. I think the Prime Minister has enough psychological preparation for some results. I'm not going to comment on this, I just want to say, pay attention to the way. Li Tianlan looked down at the gradually boiling tea in front of him, and said in a flat voice, The way I choose is the most appropriate, and it is what he deserves. Li Huaqing quickly frowned. What are you going to do? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly, and looked a little surprised. Didn't I just say? When we were outside. Li Huaqing's movement suddenly stiffened, and even his expression became a little stiff. What Li Tianlan just said. Put the video of Chen Lijuan on the internet? Let all the members of the Chen family die? Li Huaqing pondered and did not speak for a long time. Winner takes all, no matter where it is, this is the truth. As a loser, Chen Fangqing had nothing to say. His life and death were already destined. Li Huaqing could accept it, and he could also accept the disappearance of some core members of the Chen family. But Li Tianlan's meaning was very clear. He was not going to let Chen Fangqing, the whole Chen family, and he was not going to leave any leeway. If the Chen family ended up extremely miserable, it would cause extremely strong turbulence in the whole Zhongzhou state, and others would inevitably feel sad. What Li Huaqing wanted was stability, and such a situation was not what he wanted to see. Tianlan, the Prime Minister did do something wrong, but after all the others are innocent. Li Huaqing looked at Li Tianlan and said slowly, Everyone is qualified to say that they are innocent, but Chen Fangqing is not. Li Tianlan said faintly, The termination plan? Oh, she has already left Beihai and me, and now no one knows where she is. When Chen Fangqing started the termination plan, did he not consider the innocent? According to his style, if the battle in Beihai fails, or if we don't stand the pressure in the past 2 years, what will happen to Beihai? What will happen to Emperor Dong's palace? Li Tianlan looked at Chen Fangqing and said faintly, It's all the same. I can be sure that if we lose, no one will say that they are innocent, including you. Li Huaqing looked away a little awkwardly. It was undeniable that even in Li Huaqing's heart, he also hoped that Chen Fangqing could completely break up the Wang family of Beihai, and then completely suppress Emperor Dong's palace. None of them wanted to see Beihai continue to develop, and no one was willing to see the rise of a new group. Chen Fangqing was like this, and so was Li Huaqing. Li Tianlan could have power, but in their expectations, absorbing Emperor Dong's palace before the Flourishing Age Fund was already the limit of their tolerance. Completely suppressing Emperor Dong's palace and maximizing his personal strength and future was the most correct way of governing a country. It had nothing to do with right or wrong. From the perspective of the overall interests of Zhongzhou state, this was the position that a ruler must have. Chen Fangqing did so. So did Li Huaqing. The only difference between the two was that Chen Fangqing didn't believe in evil when he found that things couldn't be done. He stubbornly insisted on doing it. He used unorthodox methods and unconventional methods, and even joined hands with East Island to start the battle in Beihai. But in the end he still failed. Li Huaqing was much smarter and calmer than Chen Fangqing. After finding that things couldn't be done, he quickly adjusted his mentality and accepted the reality. He was still trying to control the situation within the scope of his control. Now the academics were cooperating with Li Tianlan and the new group, and they were also competing with the new group. At this level, friends and enemies were no longer pure. The relationship between them had been changing subtly, but one thing was certain. Li Huaqing wouldn't have a good impression of Li Tianlan, and Li Tianlan would have the same impression of Li Huaqing. If we lose, what will happen? Li Tianlan asked softly. He didn't wait for Li Huaqing to speak and continued. I will die, Wang Shengxiao will die. The Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace will be shattered. My women, my brothers, my supporters, none of them will have a good end, and neither will their families. They will die in all kinds of accidents, in prison and hospitals, and more people will die. The Southeast Group, the Giant Group, the North Group, the Flourishing Age Fund. How many people are there? Have you counted? If there is such a time. Li Tianlan looked at Li Huaqing, and his eyes were as sharp as knives. Will someone stand in your position and say that they are innocent? First of all, will you? Li Huaqing opened his mouth and was about to say something, but Li Tianlan had already said directly, it doesn't matter whether I will or not. His voice was cold, with a kind of extreme confidence and strength. Because I will not lose. All those who touch the bottom line of Emperor Dong's palace should think about Chen Fangqing's end in the future. Li Huaqing was silent. Dead silence. After a long time, he took a deep breath and said slowly, do you know how many years the Prime Minister has worked in Zhongzhou State and what he has done for Zhongzhou State? I know, and I can even understand, Li Tianlan said lightly, but this is not a reason to be forgiven. Families and countries are never completely consistent. I recognize his contribution to Zhongzhou State, and I recognize everyone, every director, and every member of parliament. Even Gu Xingyun, from the perspective of Zhongzhou State, is not a bad person. He has also made a lot of contributions to Zhongzhou State over the years. They all deserve respect, and so does Chen Fangqing. Li Tianlan said calmly. But this can't be a reason for them to hurt Emperor Dong's palace, nor a reason for me to forgive them. I can do what they can do in the future. I don't have such a long-term vision, and I don't have your so-called overall situation. I only know one thing. Whoever dares to hurt the people around me, Emperor Dong's palace will kill his whole family. He is a meritorious minister, a hero, and he can be anyone. But in my eyes he is an enemy. Li Huaqing sighed, feeling a little helpless. It was not until this time that he understood why Li Tianlan came directly to Hidden Dragon Sea after arriving in Yuzhou. To discuss some problems of the new group? Maybe there was a reason for this. But the most important thing was that Li Tianlan came here to give him a notice. A notice on how to deal with Chen Fangqing. It was not a discussion but a notice. So no one could stop Li Tianlan. Chen Fangqing's position was very high, and he had done a lot of hard work. But he chose to become Li Tianlan's enemy. The termination plan was against Wang Yuetong. The battle in North Sea seemed to be against North Sea, but in fact it was also against Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan could not tolerate all of this. So Li Tianlan wanted to retaliate against Chen Fangqing in the cruelest, coldest, and most gloomy way. He wanted everyone to see what would happen to those who went against Emperor Dong's palace. Since the rise of Emperor Dong's palace, Chen Fongqing was the first opponent with enough qualifications and status. Li Tianlan needed to build the deterrent force of Emperor Dong's palace with his and his family's blood and lives. Put it down gently? It seemed reasonable, but it was not in line with the future of Emperor Dong's palace. What Li Tianlan wanted to do in Yuzhou this time was to be unreasonable. Li Tianlan took out a cigarette and suddenly said, "I'm hungry. Order something to eat." "Shall I order something?" Qin Weibai, who was sitting next to Li Tianlan, stood up with a smile. The food and drink in Hidden Dragon Sea was very rich, but if they only ordered according to the specifications of working meals, everything would be simple. "No need." Li Huaqing smiled and said, "Let Ma Si go." He reached out to touch the call button beside him, but suddenly there was a gentle knock on the door. Ma Si walked in and reported softly, "President, Your Majesty, the Prime Minister has left." Li Huaqing glanced at Ma Si with some doubts. Chen Fongqing did not follow in, so he would not stand outside all the time. It was natural for him to leave. Ma Si glanced at Li Tianlan and hesitated. "Say it. Don't be so hesitant." Li Huaqing shook his head. Well, the Prime Minister returned to his office, sorted out a lot of documents, and then left the office. "Look at the direction." After a pause, Ma Si looked at Li Huaqing's face and whispered, "Look at the direction. The Prime Minister should be going to the office of the Vice Minister, Hua Zhengyang." Li Tianlan lowered his head, and his eyes suddenly became a little fierce. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes. He nodded and said, "I see. You informed the canteen to make a few dishes for dinner." Ma Si nodded and closed the door again. At the same time, in the Hidden Dragon Sea, Chen Fongqing came to the door of the Winter Pavilion with a big box full of documents. The Winter Pavilion was the residence and office of Hua Zhengyang, the Vice Minister of Zhengzhou State. Perhaps for the sake of convenient communication, it was very close to the Green Flower Hall, where Chen Fongqing lived. When Chen Fongqing walked over, he just paused outside the door and then walked straight in. "Prime Minister." The secretary, who had obviously noticed Chen Fongqing, stood up and smiled respectfully. Chen Fongqing nodded and asked directly, "Is Comrade Zhengyang here?" The secretary would have noticed him on his way here. In the past, Hua Zhengyang should have come out to greet him. But now, Chen Fongqing laughed at himself and didn't bother to care about it. But what he didn't expect was the secretary's answer. The secretary's voice was still respectful, with an obvious apology. "Prime Minister, I'm sorry. Vice Minister Hua is not feeling well today. He went to the backyard to sleep an hour ago." Chen Fongqing was obviously stunned for a moment. He looked at the door behind the secretary. A little light came through the crack in the door. It was quiet inside the door. Chen Fongqing was silent for a long time. There was obviously someone in the office behind the secretary. This was the office of the Vice Minister of Zhengzhou State. If he was not inside, who could go in? Who dared to go in? And the secretary was sitting here at this time. If Hua Zhengyang was already resting, why was he sitting here? Everyone could figure out what was going on, and they would also understand Hua Zhengyang's subtext. That was, he didn't want to see him. The reason for the other party's refusal was not clever, but it was very clear. Chen Fongqing spoke slowly and emphasized again, "It's a very important matter." "I'm sorry, Prime Minister. Vice Minister Hua is really not feeling well today. How about another day?" The apology on the secretary's face became more obvious. Chen Fongqing glanced at the closed door again, nodded, and said, "Got it." Then he turned and left the Winter Pavilion without looking back. The secretary saw him out and watched his figure go away in the night and snow. He took out his mobile phone and made a call, seemingly to call the driver. The secretary let out a sigh of relief, turned back, and gently pushed the office door open. "Vice Minister, the Prime Minister has left," the secretary said softly. Hua Zhengyang stood in the office and was practicing calligraphy. When he heard the words, he paused for a moment. A drop of ink fell from the tip of the brush onto the snow-white rice paper, leaving a dark stain. "I see. The brush fell," Hua Zhengyang said calmly. Chen Fongqing walked back to Qinghua Hall again. The black Hongqi car was parked in front of the door. The driver stood in front of the door, watched Chen Fongqing come over with a box, and gently opened the door for him. Chen Fongqing sat in the car, patted the box, and closed his eyes. "Prime Minister, where to?" the driver asked as he started the car. After a moment of silence, Chen Fongqing said lightly, "To Building 11 of Dragon Lake Park." Building 11 of Dragon Lake Park. The driver was obviously stunned for a moment. He seemed to be a little suspicious and repeated again, "Building 11? Chen Fongqing closed his eyes and said softly, "Yes." Chapter 1076. The black red flag slowly drove out of the hidden dragon sea in the night. Yuzhou City was brightly lit. The gorgeous light shone in the closed car, which was a little hazy and psychedelic. The driver, Old Gao, drove the car steadily. From time to time, he quickly glanced at Chen Fongqing, who was sitting in the back row with his eyes closed. Old Gao's heart was in turmoil. He was a little uneasy, a little excited, and a little hesitant. No matter what, the chauffeur of the leader could see the situation better than most people. Who the leader was talking to, how the mood was after the conversation, and even what they were talking about. From these, it was easy for the chauffeur to infer some things and roughly understand the invisible but distinct barriers between the major groups. Chen Fongqing was in a very difficult situation these days. Old Gao saw all of this. It was not easy to be a leader, and all aspects would also affect the people around him. Old Gao also suffered a lot during this time. Because of this, he felt a little incredible about the destination of Chen Fongqing's trip. Building number 11 in Dragon Lake Park. In Old Gao's mind, Chen Fongqing might go anywhere now, but he would not go to building number 11 in any case, and he should not go there. Dragon Lake Park was not too far from the hidden Dragon Sea, and it was not open to the public. In the huge park, dozens of villas were sporadically dotted among the green mountains and rivers. They were the residences specially built by Zhongzhou State for the sitting MPs, retired MPs, state advisors, and other leaders of Zhongzhou State. Building number 11 was Villa number 11. The owner of this place was not close to Chen Fongqing at all. In the current situation, he could even be said to be an enemy. This was the residence of Wu Jingmin, a member of Zhongzhou State and the deputy prime minister of the cabinet. It was said that he was the firmest supporter of the young emperor of Tiannan. Many policies implemented in recent years were obviously taking care of Tiannan. Most of the support in funds and resources was handled by him. It was said that the young emperor of Tiannan had already established a new group. After the election, Wu Jingmin, who should have retired due to his age, would continue to wield even more power. He might even become a director. If that was the case, he would become the supreme leader and flag bearer of the new group. In any case, the leader sitting in the back row would not be a friend of Wu Jingmin. What is the prime minister doing here so late? Old Gao thought silently. The red flag passed through the brilliant lights and gradually approached the heavily guarded Dragon Lake Park. After passing the checkpoint and showing their identification, the car went up the winding and smooth road. In the back of the car, Chen Fongqing opened his eyes and wound down the window. The chilly night wind poured into the car, blowing up Chen Fongqing's grizzled hair. The persistent headache began to subside, and his consciousness also became clearer. Wu Jingmin. He silently thought about this person, and the memories in his mind were more than most of the others. Scenes after scenes flashed through his mind. Chen Fongqing grabbed the box beside him and took a deep breath. The headache became more and more intense. However, he had completely calmed down. The car stopped in front of Villa 11. The villa was lit up. Wu Jingmin, who was older than Chen Fongqing but looked more energetic, was already standing at the door, welcoming them with a smile. The most praiseworthy thing about Wu Jingmin was that he abided by the rules, but it was also the most troublesome thing about him. The Li family had been desolate for more than 20 years, and he had defended Jiangzhou alone until Li Tianlan appeared. Jiangzhou could be regarded as the base camp of the Li family. Such persistence had an absolute relationship with his absolutely stable style of doing things and excellent personal integrity. For so many years, Wu Jingmin was either radical or conservative, strong or conciliatory. Every time he was reasonable and well-founded. He and Li Tianlan were of different ages and styles of doing things. Li Tianlan could point to Chen Fongqing and ask him what he was, which was young and aggressive. However, no matter what kind of opponent Wu Jingmin faced, he would correct his attitude and be calm. The car stopped beside the street lamp in front of the door. Wu Zhengmin, who was ready to rest, had changed his clothes. He took the initiative to take 2 steps and shook hands with Chen Fangqing, who got out of the car. There was no contempt or sarcasm in his smile, and he said in a gentle voice, "Hello, Prime Minister." Chen Fangqing shook Wu Zhengmin's hand hard, and did not respond to the somewhat condescending comrade Wu Zhengmin. He looked at the old man in front of him who was 6 years older than him, and his eyes were a little dazed. Perhaps there was no hope of looking forward, so at this moment, his mind was flashing with all kinds of past. "Speaker Wu, you are old," Chen Fangqing said softly, and then smiled. "I am also old." Wu Zhengmin was stunned. Mayor Wu, this title with the power of time seemed to pull him back to decades ago. Yes, decades ago, when Wu Zhengmin had just emerged, he used to be the mayor of a city in Qinzhou province, and at that time, Chen Fangqing was the deputy mayor of that city. To a certain extent, many years ago, the two of them had worked together. At that time, Chen Fangqing was still Wu Zhengmin's direct subordinate. Just like now, the two of them were both in the cabinet, but their positions had been swapped, and Chen Fangqing was walking in front. Wu Zhengmin's eyes were obviously filled with memories. Decades ago, about 40 years ago, although he had already emerged at that time, he had not really received the attention of the Southeast group. At that time, Chen Fangqing did not have any obvious traces of the group. At that time, it was the time when Wu Zhengmin was in high spirits. Chen Fangqing was young, capable, bold, farsighted, and down-to-earth in doing things. Soon he attracted Wu Zhengmin's attention, and he was recommended to the provincial council, and he was appointed as the deputy mayor of that city. At that time, the two of them could be said to work together extremely well. However, in private, the two of them were obviously not slick people, so their personal relationship was not good. With the assistance of Chen Fangqing, Wu Zhengmin's work was very smooth. He sorted out the work of the municipal government, and then began the bold construction reform. It was from that time that Wu Zhengmin officially came into the sight of the Southeast group. Shortly after Li Honghe came down for an inspection, Wu Zhengmin became the speaker from the mayor, and Chen Fangqing directly became the mayor from the deputy mayor of the council. The usual phenomenon that the first and second leaders had their own thoughts did not happen. The two of them still worked together, and shone in their respective fields. At that time, Qinzhou province was different from what it was now. Today, Qinzhou was already the backyard of the giant group, but at that time, Qinzhou was in the intertwined situation of the giant group, the Southeast group, and the Prince group. In such a complicated political environment, the rapid development of the small city in Qinzhou attracted the attention of countless people. Wu Zhengmin began to become important in the Southeast group. At the same time, many people began to contact Chen Fangqing. People from the Southeast group, the giant group, and the Prince group all contacted him. However, there was an unspoken rule that could not be regarded as a rule. It had always existed in Zhongzhou state, from the country to the provinces, and from the cities and counties. The focus of this election was Wen Xiyuan and Hua Xingyang. Hua Xingyang's biggest disadvantage was Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing was the president and came from the academics, so many people did not want to see Hua Xingyang, who also came from the academics, become the prime minister of Zhongzhou state. This was a good thing for the academy, but for others it was a real scruple. The first and second leaders were completely in the same position, and were highly consistent. Most people did not want to see such a strong force. As for each province, except for those like Northeast, Beihai, Jiangxia, Tianfu and Zhongyuan, which were the backyard of the major groups to cultivate their own talents, in most provinces, the speaker and the governor would not come from the same group. Each of the major groups had their own forces in different provinces. Some groups had a great advantage in terms of power, so that province would become their backyard in the conventional sense. However, there would always be different voices and different standpoints. Other than some core foundational provinces, there was no province that truly only had one kind of power. It was the same for the provinces and the cities and counties. In those days, the three major groups had contact with Chen Fangqing. At that time, the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai were still in the same boat. It was no exaggeration to say that the Southeast Group was Chen Fangqing's best choice at that time. Further, the olive branch of the Southeast Group was what Chen Fangqing desired the most. But he finally chose the Prince Group. The reason? The main reason was for the hidden rule. Or, it was for more than 6 million people in the 3 districts and 11 counties of that city. If he had chosen the Southeast Group, then Wu Jingmin and himself, who were also from the Southeast Group, would inevitably be transferred away in the near future. Judging from the situation in Qinzhou at that time, those who could go to that city to partner with him, or Wu Jingmin, did not agree with their idea of developing the city. But the foundation of that city had been laid. The curve of the city finance was like a roller coaster, with big profits and big profits. All kinds of investments bloomed everywhere. At the same time, the various mortgages in the city and the funds raised by the people also reached an extremely terrifying number. That period was the most critical period for that city. Wu Jingmin and Chen Fangqing cooperated best. If either of them were to leave, it would cause turmoil in the situation. If another person who did not agree with their concept of development came, it would affect the whole situation. In the end, there might be unimaginable chaos, which would then lead to an incomparably huge social problem. At that time, the future of that city would be destroyed, and the future of the two would also be destroyed. So Chen Fangqing chose the Prince Group, which was second only to the Southeast Group at that time, and successfully stayed. Such a choice, no matter whether it was right or wrong, at least bought nearly 4 years for him and Wu Jingmin. In those 4 years, that city quickly established everything and walked on the most correct path. For years later, Wu Jingmin was transferred from Qinzhou to Minnan. In the following years, Chen Fangqing was transferred from Qinzhou to Tianfu. Then Wu Jingmin went from Minnan to Jiangxia, and Chen Fangqing went from Tianfu to the southwest. The two dazzling stars of that era gradually drifted away and never worked together again. Wu Jingmin rose from Jiangxia and became the speaker of Jiangxia. The Li family collapsed, and he was firmly fixed on the position of the speaker of Jiangxia. For decades he did not advance or retreat, and he was as stable as a rock. Chen Fangqing rushed out of Tiannan, entered Yuzhou, entered the cabinet, and became the prime minister. The different trajectories were getting farther and farther away, and the tacit understanding between the two seemed to be fading. However, the city that they had once developed reasonably was left behind. The city located in the hinterland of Qinchuan, 800 miles away, was thriving. The two silently watched its development get better and better. The city, known as the first capital in the world, gradually became the new provincial capital of Qinzhou and a dazzling pearl in the central area of Zhongzhou state, blooming the light that the two of them had condensed for several years. That was an extremely beautiful memory. Wu Jingmin was silent for a long time before he patted Chen Fangqing's arm hard and said with some emotion, "Yes, I'm old, and my hair is white." At this moment, looking at the prime minister who was at the end of his rope, he was reminded of the young man who excitedly talked about the country with him decades ago. He was full of energy, high-spirited, and ambitious as he planned the city. The past was like smoke, vivid in his mind. Once again, he thought of the question that he had thought about countless times. If Chen Fangqing had chosen the Southeast Group, with his ability, he would have been highly valued by Li Honghe. If Chen Fangqing had chosen the Southeast Group, in that era, the Li family would have had 2 incomparably brilliant stars. The Li family's Gemini stars. Maybe the treason case would not have happened. Maybe there were too many maybes, too many ifs. But they all became the reality. There were no ifs. No one would have thought that the choice back then would bring Chen Fangqing to the present situation. Similarly, no one would have thought that when Chen Fangqing, who had surpassed the old leader one step ahead, was in a hopeless situation, his old leader came back from the dead and returned to the power center, and was still thriving. Life was like a drama with ups and downs. Every rise and fall was fate. Wu Jingmin smiled and reached out sideways. "Please come in." Chen Fangqing's eyes seemed to become warm quietly. He held the suitcase tightly in one hand and walked into the villa with Wu Jingmin. Wu Jingmin made a pot of Yuzhou-scented tea for him, and the fragrance was overflowing. He sat opposite Chen Fangqing, pushed the cigarette in front of him to him, and said with a smile, "Catching up?" Naturally, casually and straightforwardly. Everything felt like it was yesterday. The tacit understanding that they thought had faded did not fade, but the two of them deliberately hid it. Now, with the change of mentality, everything Wu Zhengmin did was no different from what he did decades ago. In the living room, the figures of the two old men seemed to go back in time and return to the office decades ago, which was far less luxurious than it was now. Chen Fangqing's headache seemed to have eased a lot. He smiled, took out a cigarette, lit it and whispered, "Business." Wu Zhengmin nodded and continued to wait for Chen Fangqing to speak. Chen Fangqing opened the suitcase. Inside the box were stacks upon stacks of documents. "I've sorted them out in recent years." Chen Fangqing smiled and said, "I've put forward some bills at the cabinet meeting. Well, you should know about them in the past 2 years." Chen Fangqing said with a wider smile. This might be the reason why he came here without hesitation after not seeing Hua Zhengyang. Wu Zhengmin had been in the cabinet for more than 2 years. Others might not have noticed it, but Chen Fangqing remembered it clearly. Because of their different positions, the contradiction between the two would become very sharp. However, Wu Zhengmin had never opposed the proposals that Chen Fangqing put forward at the cabinet meeting. Instead, he would try his best to support them. The development of the two was really consistent to some extent. "I still remember." Wu Zhengmin nodded and said, "In fact, even if the bill was rejected, I don't think you're wrong. It's just that the time is not right. It takes time." "Yes," Chen Fangqing said softly, "sometimes I'm a little impatient. 10,000 years is too long. Seize every minute," Wu Zhengmin said with a smile. Chen Fangqing raised the corner of his mouth in self-mockery and said with some regret, "Unfortunately, I don't have time. So I brought all these here today, and I can only ask you to help me." Wu Zhengmin did not speak. He knew that Chen Fangqing did not mean to ask him to plead for Li Tianlan, and it was impossible for Wu Zhengmin to plead for Chen Fangqing. In fact, if he spoke, Li Tianlan might be unhappy, but he would give Wu Zhengmin face after all. But the biggest degree of this face was to spare Chen Fangqing's life. This life meant nothing to Chen Fangqing now. These are some proposals about new energy. This is about the reform of the cabinet system. The reform of education and healthcare. This is a detailed plan for the real estate industry. These are some measures to reduce the burden on farmers. Chen Fangqing took out one document after another and placed them in front of Wu Zhengmin like a hill. Many of the documents were never taken out by Chen Fangqing at the cabinet meeting, but they were extremely precious. They were the condensation of all his wisdom and efforts. Chen Fangqing introduced them tirelessly. Time gradually passed in his voice. The night was getting darker. Wu Zhengmin was in high spirits. Chen Fangqing's voice was calm and peaceful, with trust. He knew Wu Zhengmin. Maybe it was Wu Zhengmin decades ago. But he believed that there were always some characteristics that time could not wash away. He could work hard for the Li family for decades. Then he could also do his best for Zhongzhou State. It was not until nearly 4 o'clock in the night that Chen Fangqing finished saying everything he wanted to say. He put all the materials back into the box, took away 2 proposals that were really not very mature, and then handed the whole box to Wu Zhengmin. Wu Zhengmin took it with both hands with a solemn face. The two of them shook hands tightly. "Want to have some supper?" Wu Zhengmin smiled and looked at his watch again. "It should be breakfast now." "Forget it." Chen Fangqing shook his head. "I'll go back now. I'll go around the Hidden Dragon Sea and eat something by the way. I like the tofu pudding in the Hidden Dragon Sea. It's better than here." Wu Zhengmin laughed and looked at Chen Fangqing. He saw relaxation and endless calmness in his eyes. "Until now, I can say that I have really done everything I can for Zhongzhou State." Chen Fangqing laughed. "Whether it's merits or demerits, let the later generations judge." He let go of Wu Zhengmin's palm. "Let's go. You don't have to see me off." Wu Zhengmin insisted on seeing him out of the villa. Chen Fangqing walked to his car in the night without looking back. He casually waved his hand behind him, and then walked forward calmly. He walked to his own doomsday. Chapter 1077. It was early morning in the Hidden Dragon Sea, and everything was quiet. When the car passed the first checkpoint in the Hidden Dragon Sea, snowflakes fell over Yuzhou again. The snowflakes were like stars, getting bigger and bigger. When the car officially entered the gate of the Hidden Dragon Sea, there was a faint layer of white on the main road that had been cleaned. His head began to hurt again. Chen Fongqing rubbed his forehead hard, and his body trembled a little. He had had a headache for several years. The most advice his private doctor gave him was that he should rest more, pay attention to his diet and lifestyle, and smoke less. However, in his position, he couldn't do these seemingly reasonable and common suggestions at all. As the business became more and more heavy recently, he began to take painkillers. However, the pain kept getting worse, and it seemed that even painkillers had lost their effect. "Stop the car," Chen Fongqing ordered in a low voice. The black red flag stopped on the main road of the Hidden Dragon Sea, which was covered with snow. Chen Fongqing opened the door. The cold wind blew in, and his headache was slightly relieved. He felt much better. "Xiao Gao, thank you for your hard work tonight." Chen Fongqing glanced at the driver. "Go back. I'll take a walk outside and wake up." His voice was a little weak. The driver, Old Gao, glanced at him worriedly. Chen Fongqing got out of the car and waved at Old Gao again. He was very persistent. Old Gao nodded and didn't say anything. The red flag slowly moved away from Chen Fongqing. The boundless cold and the messy snow completely surrounded Chen Fongqing. In the winter morning of Yuzhou, it was very late. As the car left, there were only cold street lights and flying snow in front of Chen Fongqing. He stood in the faint light for a long time before he walked slowly on the snow, looking a little bleak and lonely. Chen Fongqing wandered aimlessly. Chen Fongqing chatted with Wu Jingmin for nearly a night, and talked about a lot of things. He talked about the macroscopic general direction, the subtle regulation, and various fields of Zhongzhou State. Chen Fongqing told him everything he knew. The fields he thought about were the fields that Zhongzhou State needed to change at present. In other words, after he handed those things over to Wu Jingmin, some of them would soon come in handy. There were a few new policies that needed to be implemented urgently. However, the situation before the election was chaotic, and Chen Fongqing was in an extremely passive situation, so he had no choice but to suppress it. Now that those things were handed over to Wu Jingmin, he believed that Wu Jingmin would be able to use them very soon. His position was basically set in stone, and there was not much competitive pressure. Naturally, no one would deliberately become enemies with him. There was no need to wait for the election. At the next cabinet meeting, he would have a high chance of passing if he proposed it. By the time those policies were truly effective, Chen Fongqing would have long been deliberately forgotten. Those things would naturally become Wu Jingmin's resources and achievements, and then reputation. He originally planned to give this reputation to Hua Jingyang to help him, but now Chen Fongqing shook his head. His heart seemed to have truly relaxed. The cold wind whistled around him, and the speed at which his headache subsided was increasing. All the burdens had been completely removed overnight. He began to face his own fate with an incomparably calm attitude, facing his own life and death. Really, there was nothing else that he needed to do. He told himself this with certainty. In the last years of his political life, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. He mobilized countless resources and paid most of the chips to do one more thing for Zhongzhou State, but he reaped an extremely tragic failure. He was unwilling, confused, disappointed, angry, and even afraid. But everything was a foregone conclusion. He handed over the future plan of Zhongzhou State, which was his last political wealth. The coordination between the academics and the prince group in the future would mainly be done by Guo Wentian. The only thing he needed to do was to find a suitable opportunity to express his attitude in the next few days. It was an attitude that was better than silence, but it wasn't that much better. It was dispensable. Next, it was time for him to retire early. Retirement, then waiting for the butcher's knife of Emperor Dong's palace, and then death. Chen Fongqing walked silently in the Hidden Dragon Sea at night, bathed in the wind and snow. This place was called Hidden Dragon Sea. However, the so-called Hidden Dragon Sea and Dragon Sea were just a lake. The lake water had been frozen in the winter of Yuzhou province, and was covered with snow, which looked as soft as a piece of snow-white silk. Most of the trees around the lake had withered. and the dry branches were swaying in the wind and snow. The still lush pines and cypresses were covered with snow, which looked a little unreal. Chen Fangqing walked almost all over the hidden dragon sea along the shore of the lake. The conference room, the big conference room, the golden autumn garden, the cold winter pavilion, the purple light platform. For 10 years, to be exact 15 years, every inch of land here had his memories. Chen Fangqing walked very slowly, as if he was carefully measuring the power center of Zhongzhou State. His footsteps crunched in the thicker and thicker snow. His eyes were calm, with a touch of faint but extremely dignified affection. The footprints on the shore of the lake were connected. The sky of Yuzhou was still dark. The cold lights were shining, and the world was silent. Chen Fangqing's figure walked into the small restaurant that was open 24 hours a day in the hidden dragon sea. His face was a little pale because of walking outside for a long time. Sitting in the chair, he trembled slightly. It took him 3 or 4 minutes to dispel the chill on his body. "Good morning, Prime Minister." The young staff trotted over with real respect and said with a smile, "What would you like to eat?" "Still the same?" Chen Fangqing replied with a and said with a smile, "One more." "The Prime Minister is hungry. Please wait a moment." The staff nodded with a smile and walked into the backstage. In the face of the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, he was obviously not very formal. In fact, outside of work, his character had always been extremely gentle. Among all the directors of Zhongzhou State, those who came to the restaurant in the middle of the night, or came to the restaurant to order food were basically Chen Fangqing, or the people in Chen Fangqing's office. Gradually, the night staff in the restaurant might be a small group of people who were most familiar with him except for the secretary. The tofu pudding and youtiao were soon served. Facing the breakfast that he had not been tired of for many years, Chen Fangqing didn't know why he suddenly felt that this meal was particularly delicious. His headache seemed to be completely relieved when he ate. It might also be the painkillers played a role. Chen Fangqing had a good appetite. After drinking 2 bowls of tofu pudding and eating 3 youtiao, he stood up contentedly and wrapped the remaining youtiao in a paper bag. He planned to eat it casually after getting up at noon. After saying goodbye to the staff, Chen Fangqing slowly walked out of the restaurant with the youtiao in the paper bag. The increasing snowstorm quickly drowned Chen Fangqing's figure. In the incomparably wide field of view of the hidden dragon sea, the lights were cold, the wind and snow were all over the sky. This chapter is not over, please turn the page. Stumbling. After seeing them off, Li Huaqing, who had not slept all night, stood in front of his window and quietly looked at the extremely blurred figure in the wind and snow. There was no light in the warm room. His body was motionless, like a statue standing in front of the window. The room was quiet, until Li Huaqing took the initiative to break the silence. "The last time I saw a similar figure was more than 20 years ago, also in this place, also in a snowstorm, also in the early morning," Li Huaqing suddenly said. "More than 20 years ago?" Beside Li Huaqing stood a man who looked less than 40 years old, between a young man and a middle-aged man. His appearance was blurred in the darkness, but his posture was extremely straight. He was also looking at the figure, then quickly glanced at Li Huaqing and said with a smile, "Dad, more than 20 years ago, you were still in Liaodong, weren't you?" Li Huaqing also smiled and looked at his son. His son was called Li Xiuqi. He did not engage in politics, but was a major general in the Zhongzhou Navy. It was rare for him to have a holiday. Soon after Li Tianlan left, he returned to the hidden dragon sea. The father and son talked all night, and happened to see Chen Fangqing at this time. "Maybe it's a coincidence," Li Huaqing whispered. "More than 20 years ago, I was the deputy governor of Liaodong. At that time, I had a meeting in Yuzhou. Prime Minister Chen was very interested in some of my views, and asked me to stay in the hidden dragon sea to talk all night. About this time, I saw the picture of Senior Li leaving the hidden dragon sea in Qinghua Hall. I still remember that at that time, Chen bowed deeply to Senior Li's back, and then he told me that an era was over." Li Xiuqi was in a daze. He knew who the Chen Xiang his father was talking about was. Although the old man was from the Southeast Group, to a certain extent, Li Huaqing was indebted to him. Before Chen Xiang died, Li Huaqing would basically visit him on New Year's Eve, even after he became the president. And seniorly, he was probably Li Honghe, the war god of Zhongzhou State more than 20 years ago. In the past 15 years, from the vice president to the president, I've seen a lot of people leave and seen a lot of people's backs. Some were lonely, some were reluctant, some were regretful, some were guilty, some were relaxed. Li Huaqing shook his head. But the thing that left the deepest impression on me was still old Li's back that year. The unprecedented failure that caught him off guard, the end of the road, the end of the road. He had some regrets, but he still had the freedom to let go of everything. There was an obvious light of memory in his eyes. That back, I want to call it wisdom. Li Huaqing laughed at himself and said, I thought I couldn't see it, but today. Chen Fengqing's back became more and more blurred in the wind and snow. I saw it again. Li Huaqing murmured to himself. Li Xiuqi hesitated and whispered, I heard that the Prime Minister had the opportunity to join the Southeast Group, and even Senior Li met the Prime Minister in person. How can there be so many if? Li Huaqing shook his head slightly. He and Wu Zhengmin didn't let Qinzhou down. It sounded like half a sentence. But it was the most complete sentence. Because there was no need to say the second half of the sentence. Chen Fengqing's back completely disappeared from sight. Li Huaqing looked at his watch, walked behind his desk, picked up the phone, and dialed Hua Xingyang's number. While waiting for the phone to be connected, he looked at the wind and snow sweeping the world outside the window again and whispered, It's all over. End of this chapter. Chapter 1078. By the time Hua Zhengyang arrived at the Golden Autumn Pavilion, there was already a faint light in the sky. He carried 2 portions of breakfast, shook off the snow on his body, and laughed heartily. President, these are freshly cooked buns. Do you want to try them? Li Huaqing smiled and nodded. He put down the internal reference document in his hand and went to the dining room. Hua Zhengyang hurriedly poured some vinegar and began to make soup. His movements were natural. Li Huaqing smiled as he watched Hua Zhengyang busy himself. Are you in a good mood? I like snow. Hua Zhengyang laughed and said, Every time it snows, it reminds me of my hometown. I haven't been back for many years. Some time ago, someone from my hometown came to visit me and gave me 2 ginseng. I made 2 bottles of wine. I'll bring you a bottle later. Li Huaqing nodded and took a bite of the bun. It was different from Chen Fengqing and Guo Wentian of the Prince Group. He was also different from Wan Qingyun and Ji Wenzhang of the Southeast Group. The relationship between Li Huaqing and Hua Zhengyang was even different from that between Dongqing Wudi and Zhou Mulin in the Giant Group. In front of Li Huaqing, Zhuang Huayang's carefree attitude always carried a clear hint of respect and deference, which included deep gratitude, admiration, awe and intimacy. The leaders of the other corporations might have different positions, but they treated each other equally. Only Hua Zhengyang was like a subordinate in front of Li Huaqing. In fact, the two of them had a clear relationship of superior and subordinate in their political careers. When Li Huaqing was the governor of Liaodong, Hua Zhengyang was the deputy governor. When Li Huaqing was the speaker of Liaodong, Hua Zhengyang was the deputy speaker. After entering Yuzhou, Li Huaqing was the vice president, and Hua Zhengyang was transferred to the Ministry of Personnel as the second leader. 5 years later, Li Huaqing successfully ascended to the top, and Hua Zhengyang entered the parliament and became the minister of the Ministry of Personnel of Zhongzhou State. When Li Huaqing was re-elected for the second time, Hua Zhengyang entered the cabinet and became the second prime minister until now. The academics was the youngest group in Zhongzhou State except for the Special Warfare Group. Unlike the Special Warfare Group, which had an inherently flawed structure, their structure was extremely rigorous and complete. They grew from a large regional group to a ruling group that influenced the entire Zhongzhou State. Any word could be used without reservation to describe Li Huaqing, and it was no exaggeration at all. His contributions were undeniable, and he was a man of great talent and bold vision. Li Huaqing completely deserved such an evaluation. The development trajectory of the academic faction was almost the same as Li Huaqing's rise. The entire academic faction was almost carried on his shoulders by his own strength, and continued to grow. His ideals influenced everyone in the academics, which made the entire academics the most energetic group among the 6 major groups. It was full of vitality. However, the short rise time also meant that the academics had shortcomings in all aspects. For example, it did not have a close enough relationship with many retired but influential old people, which was a huge disadvantage that the academics had not been able to reverse so far. Another example was that there was not enough talent reserve in too short a time, let alone a perfect promotion framework, which the academics had not completely perfected so far. When the academics transferred by Qingqian, who was born in the giant group, to its backyard, Liaodong to serve as the speaker, it was a second move that Li Huaqing planned to perfect the promotion framework of the academics. Bai Qingqian had outstanding ability and connections, and there was no need to doubt the strength of the giant group. The 2 groups could cooperate at the beginning, and the academics just wanted to use Bai Qingqian to get the support of the giant group. In their original plan in this election, they wanted to push Bai Qingqian to the position of a member of parliament of Zhongzhou State and promote in Liaodong province. In the next few years, they would work hard to stabilize this concept, so that Liaodong could get a political status similar to Wuyue, Nanyue, Beijiang, or Huading, the north, the southwest, and Yuzhou. Simply put, it was to make it a practice for the speaker of Liaodong to enter the parliament, so as to completely perfect their promotion framework. This was the goal that any group had to work hard to perfect. The so-called promotion framework, to put it bluntly, was a stable internal promotion path from an ordinary staff member to a member of parliament of Zhongzhou State. This also guaranteed that in every election, at least one member of the group would be in their own hands. His position was completely in the hands of the group, it was decided internally, and other groups could not take action. Only by establishing this position could the people in this position be guaranteed to be promoted when the group encountered a major crisis, and then ensure that the voice of the group in the top class of Zhongzhou State could be heard by others. Among the 6, only the academics did not have such a position at present. The Prince Group's Southwest City was held by a member of parliament, and other groups could not intervene. In addition to the Southwest, the Prince Group also owned Beijiang. The Southeast Group was even more excessive before. It held Beihai, Huading, and Wuyue, and the leaders of these 3 places were bound to be members of parliament. Wuyue had fallen more than a decade ago, and Wuyue was now controlled by Wang Qinglei. Even so, Beihai still had Beihai Province as the top of its promotion framework. The declining North Group also had Northern City in its hands. The giant group had Yuzhou and several fixed positions in the army headquarters. Even the new group had already locked in Nanyue. Only the academics' efforts in this regard in recent years had hit a wall everywhere. All the major groups were quietly squeezing the development space of the academics. Li Huaqing's initial goal was Jiangshan and Beijiang Province, which seemed to be in harmony with the Prince Group, but was actually alienated. However, Jiangshan's mind was deep and unpredictable, and he had never expressed his position directly. After a few years, the academics set their eyes on Tibet. However, the situation in Tibet was complicated, and it was also difficult to be the backyard of the academics for a long time. After 10 years of games, the academics could only choose the place where it started, Liaodong. 5 years ago, Bai Qingqian was transferred to Liaodong, and then the council made a lot of big moves that were beneficial to Liaodong. A large amount of funds poured into the northeast, and Liaodong changed with each passing day. If it were not for the sudden rise of the new group, Bai Qingqian was likely to be elected as a member of parliament of Zhongzhou State in this election, and the promotion framework of the academics would have taken shape, and it would take the following time to stabilize. However, Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace broke the plan of the academics, and Li Huaqing's plan was undoubtedly ruined again. Fortunately, he would continue to be re-elected after this election, and there were still 5 years to operate. Otherwise, once he retired, although Hua Zhenyang was still in power, it was really difficult for him to come up with a good solution in 5 years. At that time, the future of the academics was really a little worrying. All kinds of disadvantages always gave the emerging group the impression that although the academics was very powerful, it always lacked something. Until now, their structure was not perfect, and it could be imagined how difficult it was for Li Huaqing to rise in the beginning. Under such circumstances, It could be said that Hua Zhengyang was forced by Li Huaqing to make an exception and promote him. For Hua Zhengyang himself, Li Huaqing had an incomparable position in his heart. He was like a brother, a mentor, a guide, and even a father-like role. Although the age difference between the two was less than 10 years. From the original Liaodong to the current Hidden Dragon Sea, no matter where Hua Zhengyang was, he always regarded Li Huaqing as the most respected leader. He regarded Li Huaqing as the most respectable leader, and he was always respectful. Last night, the Prime Minister talked to me about his idea. Li Huaqing ate a bun and said slowly, for him, the situation is now out of control, and he is ready to accept the current situation. Hua Zhengyang looked at Li Huaqing in surprise. Accept the current situation? He was not familiar with Li Tianlan, but now the whole world knew Li Tianlan's character. How sensitive the election of Zhongzhou State was, and how crucial the emergence of the new group was, had now become the focus of attention of all countries in the world. Under such circumstances, Chen Fangqing was ready to accept the situation, which meant that he accepted death, and it was not only his death. Li Huaqing saw Hua Zhengyang's surprised look, and he was also a little surprised. You don't know? Hua Zhengyang shook his head in confusion, and said with a smile, although the Prime Minister doesn't have many chances now, there is always room for struggle. At the very least, he should be able to negotiate terms. Judging from his past behavior, he shouldn't give up so easily. Simple giving up, Li Huaqing murmured to himself and then shook his head. It's not simple at all. He held the bun, and it was a little tasteless. From a personal point of view, Chen Fangqing did have the possibility to struggle, but from the overall situation, accepting this outcome was the most stable way. Chen Fangqing's giving up was not simple, not at all. He thought silently and suddenly asked, didn't he tell you his plan last night? He and Guo Wentian have reached a consensus, and the Prince Group has decided to fully support you in controlling the cabinet. What did you talk about last night? Hua Zhengyang's hand holding the soybean milk suddenly froze in place. His expression completely froze in an instant. His thoughts seemed to go back to a few hours ago. At that time he was practicing handwriting in his office, and Chen Fangqing was standing outside, wanting to meet him. How did he get the secretary to respond? There was a clear trace of embarrassment on Hua Zhengyang's face. He finally realized that something was wrong. What's wrong? Li Huaqing looked at him and asked. He received the news last night that Chen Fangqing went to see Hua Zhengyang, but at that time, Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai were still there. Li Huaqing had no time to care about the conversation over there, and subconsciously ignored the question. Didn't he go to see you last night? What did you talk about? Li Huaqing asked again. Hua Zhengyang opened his mouth and finally couldn't help but smile bitterly. I didn't see him last night. Silence. Li Huaqing was completely silent. He looked at Hua Zhengyang and didn't speak for a long time. He knew what kind of person Hua Zhengyang was, so he didn't need to ask the reason to know why Hua Zhengyang didn't want to see him. Chen Fangqing didn't appear in the Hidden Dragon Sea until morning, which meant that after not seeing Hua Zhengyang, Chen Fangqing went to see someone else. Who else could he find? The cabinet was now the top structure, with one prime minister, one deputy prime minister, and 3 deputy prime ministers. After this election, Chen Fangqing would not stay, and 2 of the 3 deputy prime ministers would also retire. Hua Zhengyang didn't see Chen Fangqing, so there was only one person Chen Fangqing had to see. Deputy Prime Minister Wu Jingmin. Li Huaqing put down the steamed bun in his hand and said softly, did he go to Jingmin's place last night? Hua Zhengyang also thought of this problem. His face changed, and he looked a little embarrassed. Zhengyang, don't be silly. Li Huaqing shook his head in disappointment. No matter what, there will always be a boundary between you and him. But why? He shook his head halfway and said, what are you worried about? Hua Zhengyang became more and more embarrassed, and he didn't say anything. After a long silence, his face suddenly changed slightly, and he said softly, President, he went to see Deputy Prime Minister Wu Jingmin. Is it you? Li Huaqing shook his head slightly. Don't worry about this. He's a little old. In this election, he already has the support of the new group, so he won't be a threat to you. The Prime Minister won't choose to support him, and he doesn't have that position. However, I believe that since they have met, there must be some meaning to this meeting. I'm not worried about Deputy Prime Minister Wu, Hua Jingyang said with a wry smile. Li Huaqing still looked calm, and he said quietly, if he chooses to support Wen Siyuan, then he should go to Wang Qingyuan, Ji Wenzhang, or Yi Dongsheng. He shouldn't go to Wu Jingmin. Hua Jingyang thought about it, and his face softened a little. He took a sip of soy milk, hesitated, and said softly, should I go to visit him now? Li Huaqing glanced at him and nodded. You have to go, but now. He shook his head. He should be resting now. You can go and have a look in the afternoon. You don't have to explain anything, just go there. Hua Jingyang was a little relieved, and he nodded with a smile. In the blue flower hall that the two of them couldn't see, Chen Fangqing didn't rest, but he didn't work either. He didn't return to his office. Instead, he went to the backyard of the blue flower hall and sat down on his bed. He just sat there, silent, and through the open curtains he stared blankly at the hazy light outside the window. He began to recall his life, which had lasted for 71 years. He was born in a family that wasn't very prominent. He was from the north, but he grew up in the south. When he was born, his father was the deputy director of a small county in the south. It wasn't a big position, but he still had some power in his hands. Therefore, Chen Fangqing's childhood was very stable. He didn't wander from place to place, had no hardships, and had never been bullied. When he was a teenager, his father, who was very ambitious but also tried his best to protect the family, became the director of that small county. His rank was from the deputy section to the deputy director. Chen Fangqing walked out of the county and was admitted to the best middle school in their city with his own grades. At that time and age, a father of a deputy county was obviously not a status worth showing off in the eyes of an inexperienced teenager. Chen Fangqing didn't show off, nor did he seem to be rebellious. Until now, he still felt that he was most fortunate to have met the best and most understanding teachers in middle school, so that he always had excellent grades in the 3 years of middle school. When he was in high school, Chen Fangqing's father was transferred from the county to the city as the deputy mayor, and barely became a director of the city. It seemed like a promotion, but in fact, it was the result of a compromise after losing the competition. Chen Fangqing was admitted to the best high school in their province and left the city. His parents took out all their savings and bought a house in that city, which was ridiculously expensive because of education. His mother also moved there, just to take care of him in school. He learned to grow. His father's career didn't make any progress in high school. When he graduated from high school, he was admitted to one of the best universities in Zhengzhou at that time with excellent grades. At that time, his father was in a semi-retired state because of a serious liver disease. In his memory, his father's face was weathered and his sideburns were white. He spent most of his life in an official career. Chen Fangqing seemed to have never seen him in high spirits. All he saw was his father's increasingly haggard body and his stooped body. Chen Fangqing was 19 years old that year. On the day he got the university admission notice, Chen Fangqing swore in his heart that after graduation, he would buy a house for his parents in Beihai and let them live in the best environment. He applied to Beihai University in Zhengzhou. Yes, Beihai University. The Wang family of Beihai. Beihai of Beihai Province. Perhaps because of his father's influence, Chen Fangqing had decided on his future path since he was in high school. He wanted to follow his father's path and reach a high position. He wanted to use his own thoughts to change many people and many things. So he chose Beihai University. This was one of the best universities in Zhengzhou State. It might not be as popular as Huaqing University and Yuzhou University, but in the international ranking, Yuzhou University was slightly higher than Beihai University. But in the field of politics, even in the whole Zhengzhou State, no university could beat Beihai University. The philosophy of Beihai University focused on ideas, humanities, and politics. In the more than 500 years since the founding of Zhengzhou State, Beihai University had produced 3 presidents of Zhengzhou State, 11 prime ministers of Zhengzhou State, more than 20 vice ministers of Zhengzhou State, and hundreds of Zhengzhou State parliamentarians. This was a prominent university, a university that influenced the political trend of the whole Zhongzhou state. It was known as the Oxford of the East. The current directors of Zhongzhou State, Dong Qingwudi, Hua Xingyang, Wan Qingyan, and Bai Qingqian, who was about to become a parliamentarian, all graduated from Beihai University. Many years ago, it was Chen Fangqing's dream school. He entered Beihai as he wished and successfully completed the examination for civil servants of Beihai. The civil servants of Beihai had the best welfare in the world. Every civil servant would be assigned a house of at least 80 square meters in Beihai. But Chen Fangqing finally chose to return to his hometown. His parents refused Chen Fangqing's request to settle down in Beihai. In his father's words, Beihai was good, but home was better. That was the first time he passed by Beihai. He entered the municipal government under his father's recommendation, served as a secretary in the county, went to the provincial government, and then was transferred to Qinzhou, where he met Wu Zhengmin. Chen Fangqing was 30 years old that year. At the age of 32, his father died of illness. 3 years later, he was met by Li Honghe in person and sent an invitation. He received invitations from the Giant Group, the Prince Group, and the Southeast Group. In the face of the city he was in charge of, he made a choice that he didn't know if he should regret or not. That was the second time he passed by Beihai. Then it was a meteoric rise, Councillor of Qinzhou Province, Councillor of Talent Province, Deputy Speaker, Governor of Tianfu Province, Mayor of Sinan City, Councillor of Zhongzhou State, Speaker of Sinan City, Deputy Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State. He sang all the way, but he still didn't feel that kind of high-spirited feeling. Others had seen him working himself to the bone along the way, but he only felt that he was being cautious. He used his power and resources carefully to plan his hometown, the city he was in charge of, the province he controlled, and the country he represented. He was cautious, like walking on thin ice. 71 years of life had come to this day. Scenes flashed in front of him very clearly. Chen Fangqing sat on the bed in a daze, looking out of the window at the sky without the morning sun. The snowflakes all over the sky were dancing in the sky with cold, messy and beautiful. It was quiet, just like every day in the past many years. He asked about his yesterday. Then he asked about his life. The first question. He felt that he had a clear conscience. He couldn't answer the second question. His heart might be extremely calm, but as he said to Wu Zhengmin, whether it was merits or demerits, only future generations could judge. Chen Fangqing stood up slowly. He drew the curtains to cover the flying snow outside the window. He took a shower casually, changed out of his pajamas, slowly lay on the bed, and closed his eyes. The headache had been relieved, and he didn't need to toss and turn. Soon Chen Fangqing fell asleep. The world in the dream was a sunset. Chen Fangqing, who seemed to be many years younger, felt that he was standing by the lake of the hidden Dragon Sea and looking at the west. The splendid glow filled the world. The setting sun, which was slowly sinking in the sea of clouds, seemed to be melting bit by bit. The blood of the sun permeated the sea of clouds and the sky, turning it into an incomparably magnificent blood red. The blood red quietly occupied all the fields of vision. Finally, it turned into a pair of eyes. A pair of eyes occupied the sky in the dream, and covered the sea of clouds. A pair of eyes that were cold and quiet, but extremely majestic. Those eyes were bright and calm. She looked down at the earth and the hidden Dragon Sea, reflecting the magnificent scene of the whole world, beautiful like a dream. Looking at those eyes, Chen Fangqing was suddenly filled with fear. His consciousness was torn apart by fear, and his complete consciousness was torn to pieces in an instant. Messy thoughts danced randomly in the dream where darkness and light intertwined. Some of them were warm, some were even scorching. The hot feeling boiled at the highest point of his consciousness. Like a speech without much warmth, it slowly slid down to the unknown. The dream was completely broken. Darkness occupied everything. In the front direction, there was a cliff of tens of thousands of feet, and an endless abyss. Chen Fangqing suddenly opened his eyes. Everything familiar in the bedroom did not appear in his sight. There was darkness and nothingness in his sight. The seemingly endless darkness and nothingness filled the bedroom and filled the world. It was quiet and silent. Chen Fangqing opened his eyes quietly. The darkness and nothingness were getting closer and closer to him, like a piece of gauze, covering his body. It was also like the endless floating dust had found a home, accumulating more and more on his body. The darkness fell completely. Chen Fangqing, who was motionless, looked ahead quietly. The darkness that fell completely surged and finally drowned his body in the seemingly endless darkness and nothingness. Until eternity. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.